Hey guys, welcome to Skolo Online Learning, the channel that is all about learning, guys. Today I'm celebrating a very special day. Our channel has finally reached 1.99 thousand subscribers. So we like a couple of, I think 4 or 5 subscribers away from 2K subscribers. This is really amazing, guys. We've had amazing growth. I think we started this channel about a year ago in June. Okay, so in about 12 months, we had reached 1,000 subscribers, and now it's been just about 4 or 5 months. We are at 2,000 subscribers. So this is really, really good. Thank you guys for subscribing. All right, if you're new to this channel, we make videos on online learning. We teach you guys how to do a lot of things yourself. In the last 2 sessions, we were busy with this series where we are teaching you how to build your own invoicing app from scratch using Django. So this is going to be the last video in that series. If you're watching this video, we have a lot of information that we have available inside of the description. So always go into the description box of your video. Okay, so if I say I link something below, it will be in there. All right, and there's video timestamps that you can fast forward to a specific section of the video. You don't have to watch the whole video. The videos are quite long, and when you come back in future and you want to refer back to something on the video, you will know where the timestamp is. So use those timestamps. If you click on it, it will take you to the section of that video that we're talking about, the specific thing. If you click on 26, it will take you over there, and you can watch that video that way. All right, and remember to follow us on our social media. Remember, we've got a Medium publication. All right, so if you go to our Medium channel, we've got a lot of written tutorials on the things that we are showing you here. So the invoicing app has got its own written tutorial as well, where I've got some code snippets in there that you can go through and read what I was discussing. All right, and we also have, for this specific tutorial series, we've got a GitHub page. All right, so you can go to the GitHub page over there and you can download the code and you can code as we go along. All right, so what we're gonna show you in this tutorial is this invoicing app. This time we're gonna finish it up. All right, so this is the finished version of the app. I didn't do a lot of styling for the front page. That's for you to do. This is not a styling tutorial. Okay, so if you go to the front page of our application, you can click on the login button. And if you click on the login button, it will take you to our application itself. So I'm going to log in here, admin@skolo.online. That is my username. All right, and I've got a password that I'm going to use over here. And then you're going to sign into the application. Once you sign in, this is the dashboard. You can immediately see quickly, these are the number of invoices we've got and the number of clients that we've got in here. All right, and then on the left, we've got our navigation. You can see your invoices, your products, and your clients. If you go to the clients, that's where we started. You can see a list of clients that we have. You can add a new client. You know, you can choose, I don't know, veggies galore. You can add a client logo. You can add their address, 56 Nelson Mandela Road, that's in Limpopo. The postal code is 1234 and the phone number is 082-123, whatever that phone number is. And the admin I'm going to use here, admin@study.digital, so I can use a real email address. Later on, when we're emailing this client an invoice, we want that client to get that invoice. When we save the changes, you'll see that Veggies Galore new client I've just added over here. All right, and then when we get to invoices, these are the invoices we already have on the system. You can add a new invoice. You can put in the invoice title. We can say first invoice of the month. You can then put invoicing details. You can choose your payment terms. You can put whatever information you want to put in there for the invoice information. And then you can choose a client. Okay, first of all, let's save that information. You have to save it first over there. That's a different form. You can choose your client. Let's say we choose Veggies Galore. You can add that client. It tells you which client has been added. You can add products to your invoice. Let's say you call this website design. All right, complete WordPress website design. All right, quantity is 1, the price is 1,200 rands, and the currency is in South African rands. Then you'll see that quantity appears over there. You can add another quantity. You can call this e-commerce design, and then you can say here e-commerce website design. Okay, the quantity is 1 and the price there is 4,500 and the currency is the same. All right, you'll see now we've got 2 quantities on our invoice. We've selected our client, we've edited the invoice information. We can view this invoice in PDF, what it looks like. All right, there it is. All right, that's the total amount, that's the quantity. You can print, you can copy this, print this, or you can go back and you can immediately email the client this invoice. All right, so let's say we email the client this invoice. That email is going to go out. I think we've entered a correct email address. That's why we used that email address. Let's go to our email and just double check that. I used admin.digital. Let's just wait for it. There you go, invoice notification. This email just came through now. You please find attached invoice from Skolo Online Learning for your immediate attention. All right, and then you can open your invoice. This is the invoice we just made right now. All right, even with the spelling error over there, e-commerce design and all of that we typed in there, the price of the invoice. So I'm going to show you exactly how to do this part. If you've been following along, we're already quite far, but in this last session, we're going to finish up this video tutorial series and I'll show you exactly how to get the website to where it was last week to where it is now. So guys, watch all the way until the end because this is an interesting stuff. The skills I'm teaching you here is skills you're going to take. You can go and get a job as a Django designer. You can build this thing and charge people for creating invoices for them. You're going to be like, you can do a lot of stuff. I'm teaching you a lot of information in here. And this is probably one of the most, advanced, I think, Django courses that's available out there where these skills are really taught step by step. I want to take you through the code step by step and you will see everything I'm doing as I'm doing it. And I will even make the code available at the end of the tutorial. So let's get started. If you're watching and catching up with us for the first time, you need to start by looking at session 1 and session 2 or tutorial 1 and tutorial 2 of this series. You won't be able to follow along if you haven't done those. So we've already coded a whole lot and we are like just 2/3 of the tutorial. So you need to catch up with that. You need to know where the code is on GitHub. I'd prefer you build it yourself following the tutorial for lesson 1 and lesson 2. So at this point, you should already have a website that looks like this. So we've already done all of this coding in this series. We've already built a blank dashboard. There was a table here. I've just deleted it because that table didn't mean anything. We're going to create a dashboard here from scratch. And last week we finished off where I showed you how to do this client app or the client sort of table where you can enter clients into your invoicing application. We did it via what we call this modal. You could we had a modal there where you could enter the client information, like, I don't know, let's think of something. Great tomatoes. And you could put a logo for them or you could put an address for them. And let's say the address is 23 Church Street. You could pick a province for them. We had only 3. You could pick a code, a phone number, an email address, and a text number for them. All right, and you could save all of that and you'll see I've just added this great tomatoes over here. This wasn't there before. It's a new client. So that all is done. And where we left off last week is asking you guys to go and do the same for the products and services and the invoices apart, okay? But it wasn't as simple as the client one. And I know it was a bit of a trick question, but let's hope you've done something, and otherwise I'm going to take you through that in today's session. So the first thing I want to mention is there's some errors that I picked up in the code as I was working on today's session, and I just want to take you through it, okay? So there's some corrections you need to do so you can follow along that I've already done, but if you don't do them, you won't know that I've done them, and then you will not have the same code base that I've got. So if you recall, we had 3 models. We had the client model, we had the invoice model, and we had the product model, and then we had the settings model, which we haven't done anything with so far, all right? So if you go back to the client model, I have not made any changes here, okay? So the client model, you can leave it exactly the way that it was in the previous tutorial. If you've been following along, this model is fine without an issue. Okay, the model that we did some changes on is this one, which is the invoice model, because initially we know the invoice is going to be related to the client and is going to be related to the products and services, but it's not related in the same way. I want to say that again. The invoice model is still our primary model. It's still the main model of our application. And it's related to the client model. And it's also related to the products and services model. But they're not related in the same way. And there are these two types of relationships that you have to manage differently when it comes to coding, so you can display your information appropriately inside of your application. And I think this is the best lesson or tutorial for me to teach you this, because you can apply this in any other project. And any complex Django project includes both this type of relationships. So that's the error that I made, because I hadn't coded this far. What we did is that we had the invoice model over here related to the client model, and we also had a variable here that said, a product, and then it was also like a foreign key like this, right? And you'll see I've deleted it. So that's wrong. So this was a foreign key with product. This is wrong, because if you build a model in this way, this assumes that you're going to create your client first. And then after you create the client, then you're going to be able to build an invoice, a class, and then relate that invoice class to an existing client. Right? So that's correct. That's what we'll do in the client session. But the product is slightly different. We are not going to build the products first and then relate the invoice to the products. Not in this specific manner. If you look at our product class, it's got the quantity, the price, the currency. It's got the description. It's almost like those lines that sit in an invoice describing the services that the invoice must include. Okay, so it's not high level products for your business, but it's more like line items within your invoice. So you would create an invoice first, and then you would add those line items inside of your invoice to say, I'm invoicing for this product, I'm invoicing for this service, I'm invoicing for this product, this is the quantity, this is the amount. So technically, you're going to build the invoice model first before you build the product model. So that's the first change. Just rearrange those inside of your model file. And it's important how the models appear inside of your model files, because at the top you have the first model that you can work with first will be at the top of your file, because this is not related to any other model inside of the file. No other model is created before it, so it can't be related to another model. Then the next model that you create can only be related to models you've already created, or else you're going to get an error that it can't find it. Or maybe you've created in a different application, or this application, and then the next one, so forth and so forth. So the way the models appear is also important. Now, in this specific case, the product is not going to be created before the invoice. In this specific case, the way we've defined products, we've sort of called it a product, but technically it is the product line item inside of an invoice. So I'm going to now delete it. So if you were following along, delete this line. And if you haven't added any data into your database, you're going to be fine. But if you've added data to your database, you are going to have a problem. You might have to redo your whole database completely, because once you add data into your database, then you cannot delete existing fields, because you're going to get an error with your migrations, and then you're going to have like you're going to spend 2 days trying to fix it, and eventually you learn, actually, I should just delete the whole database and start from scratch. So there are two solutions to those migration issues. Is what I like to do personally, if I was still in development mode and I don't have any important data in the database, I just clear my whole database. But if you clear your whole database, you must then clear your migrations inside of your different applications as well. But that's, it's sort of like, it's just easier to, copy all your files and delete your whole database and just restart the whole project, as long, and then rebuild the migrations from scratch. Anyway, let's hope you didn't have any data in your database, and if you delete that field, you don't get an error when you're doing your migrations next time. So you need to delete that field, and then you'll only be left with the client. Then when we build the product model, Then we're going to add invoice as a related field to the product, which means that when we're defining a product, and product in this specific case is not a generic product the company is offering. It is a product as a line item inside of an invoice. So when we're defining that, then we're going to be able to associate it with a specific invoice. So every time we build an invoice, we have to add the line items, and then we have to tell those line items which invoice they must be associated with. And that's like pretty much the errors with the model what we had before. So make those changes, delete the invoice from here, move the models around so that the first model is your client model and your second model is your invoice model. Then you must remove the relationship to the product inside of the invoice model, and then instead inside of your product model you'll have the relationship to the invoice. Okay, I'll make this code available at the end, but if you want to follow along, I'll give you a couple of moments. You can pause this video here, make those changes, run your migrations before you can continue with the tutorial. Run your migrations, make sure that when you run your migrations you're not getting any errors, and if you do get errors that it can't find fields. The other thing you must check as well is your forms. When we did the forms last week, we inside of the product we had included there's some things you need to remove. So when you had inside of your model, sorry, talking over myself. So inside of your model, we've changed these fields around. So make sure that when you go to your forms, you just rearrange the fields inside of your form to remove what you removed in your model. And technically, we shouldn't have had it in the first place because these are related fields. They're not going to be completed inside of a form. Okay, so I shouldn't have had related fields anyway in a form. But I know I did because I deleted it. So if you have my code from GitHub, or you were following along last week, just go through the forms, and inside of your invoice form, just make sure that you remove the related fields. I think there was the client one and the invoice one. Just remove both of them from here because you're going to get an error. Make sure that your invoice form looks like this. All the fields, these are the fields that should be there. Pause and just have a look at them. Make your screen larger and copy them so that you don't get an error. And the product form must look like that. Okay, these are all the fields that must be in the product form. The client form, nothing changes because that worked fine the last time. And so those are the only two things that you must do. All right. Once you're done with that, we can continue. I'll give you a moment and then we can continue. Now, when we left off last week, I asked you to redo the views file because we started here. We built this login file view. We built the dashboard view. Well, there wasn't much to build there, and we built the client's view. All right, and this is probably the most complex view because it's doing two things. It's a form view, which is like an edit view where you can create a new instance of a client, and at the same time it's displaying the list of clients. So it's doing two things at once. So this is complex. And if you want to get like in future, if you're building other projects and you want to do views like this and you want to have like sort of references to typical Django stuff, one other thing I wanted to show you today is inside of our, what is that? Okay, I'm going to stop this. Someone is messing with my VPS. We'll get them. So what we're going to do, I wanted to show you this. This is our online learning website where we've got a lot of tutorials. In your free time, just go through them. We've got tutorials on blockchain, Python programming, WordPress, e-commerce, HTML, and other stuff. And when I get time, which I hardly ever do these days, is I try to always add fresh content on a regular basis. Now, I've decided, I think, with the tutorials that we do, there's a lot of code snippets that are good to sort of work with on a regular basis. So I've decided to build a sort of documentation site that helps you guys, my learners, to be able to do stuff quickly by referencing existing code base that we know works. Okay, so I've built over here. If you go a backslash and you go to documents like that with an S, and remember to put a slash again at the end. All right, and you click enter. you're gonna find this website that I've built on. This is amazing, guys. The ViewPress. I think I'll do a tutorial on ViewPress one of these days, maybe when I'm done with this. ViewPress is just the most amazing thing ever. I think I built this in like just an hour or 2 hours. It was so quick to build because ViewPress is like the fastest way to get your documentation built inside of a website. Everything is done for you. You just have to type what you wanted to put in there, like you're typing a blog. So I built this website, and over here you'll see there's a cheat sheet. All right, there's some things here that will help you. I've done a cheat sheet for like moving files around using rsync, git pull, git push. But what I wanted to show you is the Django cheat sheet, where there's a lot of references for Django. So in this tutorial, I'm going to be working through this as well. So I can also test it and I can improve it with time. So I make sure I've got everything right in here. Right. So inside of this Django cheat sheet, if you go to Django, where were we now? Django views, and you look at typical route with form. Okay, so I've put an example over here for what a typical route with form should look like if you're writing a Django route. Okay, and so I'm gonna work off of this. So if you're processing a form, you're gonna have to get a get and a post request, because people can get the page or they can post to the page. So when they get the page, it goes through here, and then you should display the form. So this is what we did last week. Is just recap. And then if you're posting to the page, then they'll be posting the form, and then you check if it's valid, you save it, and so forth. So this is what we did last week. And now this week I wanted to do the same thing for these other routes. I asked you to do the same thing for invoices and for products. But the trick part of it is that for invoices and products, you can't do everything the same way. You have to think through what exactly you are doing, all right, and how everything ties together. This was simple for clients because clients is not related to anything. Okay, it's the first model that we built. You can't just create it with a modal and post it and then have a table that displays it. That's why it was easier to do it like this. When it comes to our products, we can't actually do anything with products until we create an invoice, because the way we've now built our models, we've built our models in such a way that these products are going to be created as line items of an invoice, which means you're going to need to create an invoice first and then create products to go into that invoice so that you can print your invoice out. So technically, you can't do the same thing you did here with the invoices. So the only thing I've done for the products, the only thing I've done for the product route is that I've just gone to the database and fetched all the products that are available. And then I'll say context products, send it to the front end, products. Okay, so that's all I'm doing. Okay, and I'm displaying all of the products in the database. I'm not even concerned which invoice they belong to or who created the products or whatever. It's gonna be a long list of all the products available. The nice thing is that our tables are data tables, so we'll display it in data table format so that you can like search through the stuff and stuff like that. So for now, this is enough for the invoice, for the products part. We'll come back to it later when we start to create invoices and products, and you'll see what happens here. Then the next part is the invoices as well. Now to create the invoice, you can sort of build it like you built that, but because we have to incorporate products into invoicing, we sort of have to think about this a little bit more intelligently, okay? And there's no right or wrong way to do this. Everybody can do this in a way that suits their programming style, and in a way that you'll understand, in a way that you can explain it, and in a way that makes sense to you, all right? So what I've done for the invoices, I've just done the exact same thing, just fetch all the invoices. Currently, I know there's nothing in the database, but sometimes you have to program in iterations and in stages, okay? You start displaying a page, even though you know there's nothing to display, you build what the page would look like when there's something to display there, and then later on, you'll go to the next step. So these two pages currently, I've just fetched those classes from the database, and I've just, made them available to the front end as a list. All right. And then I'm going to get back later to what I'm going to do with it later, how I'm going to create it, because now I'm displaying it. I have to create it. I won't be able to create it with a modal like I did the clients, because the invoicing class is going to be a little bit more complex. I have to actually add products and services as I'm building the invoice. So I'm not going to be able to do it in a modal. So that's why this doesn't look like that. All right. I'm going to have to do it in a separate page that is a create invoice page, where I'll be able to create products as I'm building the invoice. So for now, just write the code like this and leave it there, and then we'll come back to this later. So I'm going to do this in 2 steps. Like I said, the way you do it is really up to you. I'm going to do this in 2 steps because I want to be able to create an instance of an invoice and then allow that instance of an invoice to have products added to it as you are building the instance at the same time. This is why inside of my models, if you look at my model files and you look at invoice, right, you will see that I've made everything nullable and blankable, right? This is just to help my programming because I know the only way anyone is going to enter information to this database is going to be through the front end, through me, right? And I'm allowing these things to be nullable because I want the flexibility to be able to create an instance of an invoice without being sort of like held back by the fact that I need to give it a title or whatever. Because if I don't make this nullable, then I have to define them every time I'm creating a new instance. So I want to be able to create like a blank instance. And then once I've created that blank instance, then populate it, at least then I have a unique ID and a reference to add products to it. So I can create a blank invoice and then add products to it and then populate the rest of the invoices as I go along. You understand? So now that's why I'm doing this in 2 parts. So the way I'm going to do it is I'll have a root that says, in this root, we're going to just create a blank invoice. So over here, we're just going to create a blank invoice. Then once we've created that blank invoice, we're going to immediately route the user to this part where we're going to populate now the invoice. Technically, you could do this in one route, but I'm going to separate them because I want to be able to then call the invoice back after I've created it. Technically, maybe it's not, you don't have to do it this way, but just see what I'm doing and then you'll decide, which way you would want to do it yourself, all right? So in order to do it the way that I'm doing it, we're going to have this route that is called a create invoice. And before you build this route, you obviously have to add it into your URLs, okay? So, but we'll do that later. Let's work on the view file first, and then we'll go to the URLs and we'll add it, because you have to, the URLs and the view files, they go together. But you won't have an error if you create a view that doesn't have a URL pointing to it. But you'll have an error if you create a URL that doesn't have a view. So it's always better sometimes to start with the view function, and then you will then create the URL that points to that view function. And by the way, in this tutorial, we're going to work only with function-based views. I know you can do the same thing in class-based views, but it's really up to you and your programming style. I like working with the function-based views because I come from like a Python Flask environment, and I'm used to function-based views, and I like to sort of see the logic in my head, and I know the class-based view do all of that logic for you in the back end, but I like to sort of see what I'm doing as I'm coding it. So this is just a preference. It's really up to you how you want to work with this. Now, with the create invoice function, there's a couple of things we're going to do first, okay? We're going to go and say, let's say we create something that says an invoice, right, is equals to invoice, the invoice class, all right? So this invoice class should be the same as what you have over here for invoice, all right? So this invoice class, and make sure as you're working with it over here, you have imported it at the top of your view function. So at the top over there, you have imported it. So from models, I've imported everything from models. So it's imported. So you're going to work with invoice, paste it over there. We're going to say objects, right? We're going to say create, right? And then we're going to create a new invoice instance, right? And technically, this should work without an error. Because if you look at my invoice class in the models, you don't have to define anything, because these utility fields are going to define themselves when you save, because you override the save function. The date created will be added automatically. The unique ID will be added automatically. The slug will be added. The last updated will be added as well. And so this will happen anyway with the slug field defined. So these utility functions will all be defined when you save. So technically, the invoice is not going to be blank, but these fields are all nullable. So if you wrote it like this, this will still work. But I don't want to do it like this because I want to be able to reference this so that I can now use it in the next view to add the products and services to it, because I want to make this like a seamless process. But you'll see what I mean as I'm going along. So what we're going to do is that we're going to now, instead of making it blank like that, I'm going to look through here and try and see what can I define that's not going to change. right? So because yeah, this is another thing that we changed again. Over here, I think this was self.title, all right, and I changed it to self.number. So if you were working off the you know the code from GitHub, just change that self.number to self over there and over there as well. So this was self.title inside of the return, inside of the Slugify, inside of the Slugify, because I thought it's easier to work with self.number because I can define the number myself in the function. And I hope the client doesn't change it. Actually, I can define it that the client doesn't change it, and I can make sure that the client cannot change it, and then I can use it also as a reference later on. So I'm gonna then have to define what a number is. So if I go back to my view function, I can then create a function for a number. All right, and one of the best ways obviously is to use UID, the same way I defined UID over with the models. So I can actually just copy this function for UID over there and use it to create a unique number. All right, and if you look at UID, right, let's look at UID. Let me just show you something with UID. So inside of your Python, as long as you're inside of your virtual environment, you would have UID installed because you've been running this code for a while. So you can just import it, because I want to show you something. Just say Python in there, right, and import UID, paste that, right, and then I just want you to run this function that we copied here into our views. Where is it? I just want you to run this function, and you'll see it'll give you a string that is a couple of characters long, right? But if you ran this without splitting it, right, and you just ran it string UID4, is that correct? Like that, you'll get the whole UID. So what we've done is that we get the whole UID, but it's too long, and we're like such a small company. There's no need. We don't need the whole UID. So we just took the fourth, the fourth index after splitting it on the minus. So here it splits on the minus and takes the fourth one. So now I need a smaller number. I don't want to get this long one, and this is also a little bit too long. I want this one. I want to create a UID and only work with this like 4-digit number. So you can just actually refine the same function over there, right? And instead of taking the fourth one, you can take like the first one, right? And then it will give you a number that's like this. And every time you run it, you get a different unique ID with 4 digits. You see? So every time you run it, you get a different unique ID with 4 numbers. And you can actually use this. So I'm going to use this to be my invoice unique ID. No, not invoice unique ID, but invoice number. So I'm going to use this for the invoice number because it's a unique number every time, and it's very highly unlikely that I'll get the same number twice. So I'm going to exit this, and then I'm going to just go back here and paste this what I had over there. So instead of taking the fourth index, I'm going to take the first index. So this number will be the fourth unique ID, but then I want to append something in front of this. All right, so I want to append invoice like this, INV, so that it looks a bit more like an invoice, right? So it will be INV, with some number after it, or you can even say INV minus like that, and then it will be INV with some number after it. All right. So once you've done that, you're gonna then be able to say now you can then create a new invoice, right, and create a new invoice by saying invoice objects create, we're gonna create number is equals to number, like that. So what we're doing over here is that we're creating this number, and then we're gonna create a new invoice with that same number, and then after that we're just gonna save it, which I think it's saved anyway when you create, but I don't know, I'm just used to doing this. It's just a habit, and it's not going to harm anything, so that's fine. So once I've done that, I'm going to then go back, and then I'm going to now fetch that invoice that I've just created. The good thing is that I have the number, right? So I can go fetch the same invoice with that same number, and I'll be fetching it from the database after it's been created. So it's like a blank invoice with no information except an invoice number, right? But technically, after you run this, you should have that invoice inside of your database. All right. So what we're going to do is that we're going to say invoice get. All right. Invoice get objects.get, like that. Invoice.objects.get, we're going to get the invoice with that number. right? And then what I can do now is I can then take this invoice and work on this invoice in the function. All right, so I can then use it as a, like as a function. But what I've done is that I've created a separate function, which actually I don't need to do that. Create invoice. I actually don't need to do that at all. I can just continue with that going forward. Yeah. So I'm gonna remove this. When I was conceptualizing this, I thought I would need to do this, but actually I don't need to do this at all. I can just, from here move on and continue the rest of. So we go back and fetch that invoice. We fetch that invoice, and then we can now add products to it. Okay, so currently we don't have any products. All right, so let's look at our product function. Where is it? And let's copy that function. All right, and we're gonna do that. So this function goes to the database and fetches all the products. So we're gonna say fetch all the products. I want to append something to it related to this invoice. We don't want to fetch random products or all products. We really want to fetch the ones related to this invoice. So instead of all, we'll have to filter. And we'll have to filter based on the invoice. So if you go back to your models, I always try to keep my model file right next, so I can always refer to it all the time, so I can see what's there. So if you look at your product, you can see there's a related field called invoice. So you can filter using that. So you can say the invoice is equal to the invoice like that. So you can basically go and fetch all the products of that invoice. And then after you've done that, you can then push it to your context. And so let's do that. Let's do the context. So let me just copy from somewhere where we have typed it already. Somewhere like that. All right, and just paste that. That's why I like to sort of type my code off screen, so that I don't waste your time doing all of this. But basically what you want to send to the front end now is you probably want to send your products. All right, so you want to send your products to the front end. Currently there'll be nothing because you haven't created any products, but you're building you're building the HTML like there would be something. So you're going to send the products. You probably want to send the invoice as well. So maybe you want to paste that in there and say invoice is equals to inv. Actually, maybe you can just do it like that. Invoice is equals to invoice there, and then call it invoice instead of inv. Let's not confuse things. Let's keep the naming convention the same, so that when somebody comes and reads this code later on, they'll know what exactly we're trying to do. All right, so then we can start to display our form, which is going to be our invoice form, because now we're going to be able to edit now the invoice form. And for that, again, I like to always go back to my, usually I have notes that I keep on the side, but now that I've put this on this documentation, page, I can just sort of like paste it from here, so this is like my notes. I also refer to this all the time. So I want the code for request.get. So inside of the Django views typical root form, I'm going to paste this code, copy that, and then I'm going to paste it here. So we're going to build the get root first. So for the get root, this model form is not really a model form. This form must be our form for let's look at our forms. This must be our invoice form. No, this is our products form. So we're trying to add new products. So we're gonna start with products first. We will eventually add the invoice form as well, but let's do one form at a time. So the form, and I'll call this product form, because I want to be able to differentiate between this product form and when I do the invoice form. All right, and then the product form will be we'll send it as product form like that, and product form will be equals to product form. And then we'll also have an invoice form. All right, and the invoice form will be, if you look at model at our forms, the invoice form is this one. All right, so we go back to our views, and this is the invoice form. All right, and then we do the exact same thing that we did over there. We also add it to the context, and instead of product form over there, we put invoice form. and this is also invoice form. All right, and then this will go to the front end. Okay, but this HTML is not going to be called that. We need to give the proper HTML name. This code is just to help you figure out what goes where. You're going to need to build an HTML for creating a new invoice. Okay, so it's this HTML over here. Currently it's blank, there's nothing there. I just added a title and some stuff there. There's nothing over here, but this form is called create invoice.html. Actually, so I don't get the spelling wrong, it's this one. I'm just gonna say rename so I can copy the name there, and I'll go back to the views and paste it, but it's inside of the invoice folder, and it's create invoice.html. Let me just double check that. Invoice, yes, invoice create invoice.html, and that's typically what you would also have over there. So the return, this must not return dashboard, it must return that, and you can just actually, this render can be exactly the same. What you return over here, the default return. Even so, if you post, if it was post, it wouldn't go into the request method is equals to get. It will just render the stuff without the form. But obviously we're still gonna build the request dot method is equals to post, but there'll be nothing to post for now because I haven't built any form in there, so no one will be going through that route. And an important thing when you're building a form is always the instance of the form. If you're building a form that has an existing instance in the database, you have to always describe it. If you leave it like this, it's going to create a new invoice instance, right? And you don't want that because we already have an invoice instance which we created over there. Remember, we started with an invoice number, and then we said a new invoice, we saved that, and then we went and we fetched that same invoice from the database. So that invoice already exists. So this invoice over here is the instance of the form that we're going to be building. So when you go to invoice form, you have to specify the instance. You have to say the instance is equals to invoice, the instance invoice, because a model form is always related to a model, which means that the moment you say form.save, it saves all of that information inside of a new instance of that model that it is built based upon. Now, if you don't specify the instance, it will create a new instance. Now, because we don't want to create a new instance, we need to save. I'm repeating myself, I know. This is an online learning course. You have to specify the instance. So I think this is enough for us to test out what we've done. So what we've done is that, okay, let's look at our HTML quickly. Make sure you don't have errors on this. There's nothing really here. This should be a blank HTML page. So this blank HTML page is create an invoice. Yes, our URLs. So yeah, we gotta fix the URLs. So if you go to the URLs, you will have, oh yeah, I know why I did it like that. Yes, I remember now why I did it the way that I did it. I remember why I separated the create part from the edit create. Like, I know why I did it like that, yeah, initially. So you'll see over here, this, I had two views in here. I had a view that was just doing this up to there, and then feeding that into the next view, which then fetches all of that based on a. So if you look at our URLs, you'll see there are two URLs for this. The first URL is just to create, and the only thing it does is it creates an invoice. It creates a blank invoice, and then it sends that invoice that is created, that blank invoice, to this next route. And then the next route is sort of like the edit invoice route. So this edit invoice route will be like used every time you want to edit an invoice. You can always access this route at any given time, even if you wanted to edit an existing invoice, so that it doesn't limit you. Otherwise, if you're going to create the invoice at the same time you want to edit it, we will have to force the user to always finish the invoice at every given time. So we will force the user to, if we build this view the way it is now, it means that every time a user goes into this create invoice page, they would have to finish that invoice in that they would have to finish building that invoice that time. And if they want to access it again, we still have to build a new route which has the methods and the forms and everything. So it will be, you can do it, but it will take more coding. It's actually easier to, in my mind, to have this in a different route where the user just creates a blank invoice and then the rest of the forms and everything gets done in a different route. So let's go back to doing it like that. So let's call this create invoice, and then let's go back to our URLs, and then let's call this create build invoice. We'll go in here and we're going to build that. We're going to call def, and then this one also takes in a request, but this one will take in a slug. So that's the difference between these two routes, is that in this first route, you haven't done anything. All right. And so all of this, where we're fetching the invoice up to there, all of this will come in here. All right. And this invoice will fetch it based on the slug. And so all of this ends here. When we save this invoice, we just have to redirect to here and give this route the slug. So what we're going to do over there is that after we've saved that invoice, we're going to then create inv is equals to invoice dot objects dot get. Actually, this what we had here before. Just paste it there. All right, we're gonna do that, and then we're gonna redirect. We're gonna redirect. We're gonna redirect to this URL. So if you go back to our URLs, over there you'll see this URL is called. You know, the way you build a URL is that you define the path that it will go. You define the view function, where the view function is, and then you define the name of that path. Okay, so we've created one URL path. This URL path for create invoice sends the URL to this create invoice function. And then the other one, where's my URLs? This one will send it to this create build invoice. Now the name of this URL is that, so I'm just gonna copy that, so that when we redirect to that path, and you'll see again, if you look at your URLs, is that path requires a slug, because every time you go into that path, you have to then specify what is a slug. So then we're gonna specify that the slug is equals to inv, which is this inv dot slug. All right. So you'll see why I did it like this, because typically when you have an edit page or a detailed page to view something, you always have to know the instance that you're viewing. But in this specific case, we were creating a new invoice which didn't have an instance yet, because we want to create a new invoice. So there's no slug, there's nothing, because we haven't created it yet. But we want to create it in such a way that we can add, we want to be able to add, your products and services to that invoice as we are creating the invoice. So this function, this path is going to have two forms. It has a form for product and it has a form for invoice. If we did it the old-fashioned way, where we can just create and save, we wouldn't be able to also add the new product, to that instance, because we would need to know what is the instance, and you don't know the instance before you create it. That is why we are creating it first. So once you've done that, then this redirects over there with that slug. And then what we're going to do over here is that we're going to need to then say, we're going to fetch this invoice again. But when we fetch it based on the slug, right? Because when we fetch this invoice, the only thing we have in our root is the slug. So we should be able to get it based on the slug. There we got it based on the number, because we know the number, because we use the number to create it. Then we can get the instance of that. But once we've gotten the instance, we get the slug of that instance. It's always easier working with the slugs. So we're going to fetch it based on the slug instead, and we're going to get the invoice based on the slug. Now, this is now pro. I'm teaching you pro stuff. When typically this is sufficient, but this is a pro tip. When you are developing in Django, every time you call the get function, this get function can return, if this doesn't exist, it's going to throw an error. It's going to throw an error of, instance not found or get not found. And sometimes if it gets more than two of the same, like if you had two slugs that are exactly the same, it will also throw an error. So this is a function that is typically prone to throwing an error if it cannot get the specific thing you're asking for, because you're very specific. You're asking it to specifically get that slug, All right. And if it doesn't find it, it's going to throw an error and it's going to crash your application. So in the JavaScript guys call it catching an error, right? You have to catch the exception, or yeah, so that it doesn't, you know, sort of like crash your application. So in this specific case, what I'm going to do, for Python, you want to wrap this inside of a try except block. In JavaScript, people, they call it, you know, try catch. What is it? Try catch, where you like try running something, and if something goes wrong, and you catch that exception and handle it. All right. And it's good practice for programming because it's writing robust code. Because if you don't try catch, this is where you have all these applications that are always like, you know, you're trying to find a page and you get error 500 half the time, because these guys, you know, their coding style didn't always catch the exceptions. So in this specific case, we are going to wrap this in a try. So I'm going to say try running this, okay? Try getting the invoice. And if you can't get the invoice, okay, except if there's an exception, and if you know the type of exceptions you can get, you can handle them all differently. You can say, if this exception happens, do that. If that exception happens, do that. But I'm not going to go into all of that because that's like second layer programming, okay? In this specific case, I'm really writing this function for the pure purposes of, I don't want this route to crash if it cannot get that. I'd rather reroute the user somewhere else and let them know that maybe what you're looking for doesn't exist. Because this slug might exist in the URL, and somebody can edit an URL and the slug is different, and then this throws an exception and your app crashes. So instead of allowing that to happen, rather reroute them somewhere else, so that your whole app doesn't crash because it didn't get this. So I'm going to go and find one of these reroutes, copy that, and I'm just going to paste that in here, that if that exception happens, and I'm going to call this error. All right, messages error, just say, you know, I don't know, something went wrong. And then I want to reroute them back to, if they were trying to build an invoice, they would have been on the invoice list, right? So they would have been on, if you look at the URLs, they would have been on invoices. Okay, so that's okay. We can just reroute them back there. We can just say, tell them, you know, something went wrong, and reroute them there, and then they can try something else, or they can try creating it again, or contact support or whatever. But if nothing went wrong and this invoice, they could find the invoice, right? You can just say pass, all right? Or you can say nothing, it doesn't matter. And then we can continue with the rest. So we can say, now products is product filter invoices equals to invoices. Filter invoice equals to invoice. Now we are filtering products based on this invoice, because if it passes this function, it means that that invoice exists. So we can get products based on that invoice, and then we can then send that to the, so the rest of the form actually is exactly the same. And then we can now send our clients to this HTML, which currently is blank. All right, but let's test this. All right, so because I don't like to write too much code before I test something. All right, so I'm going to save all of this, and I'm going to push my changes. Right, and then so how would you get to this route, right? So this create invoice, these views, you would start over the create invoice route, which is inside of the URLs is called create invoice. Okay, so let me just highlight that, create invoice. So you would get over here from the invoice list page. So if you look at the invoices page where you are listing your invoices, where you say add a new invoice, you would add that URL over there. So you create a URL for create invoice. Okay, so add that so that when you click that button for create invoice, it will start that process of creating a new invoice. And then the second place you can add it as well is you can add it even inside of your products list. So the products.html as well. Currently, I've added blank tables over there, but and I've added the sort of the empty state. But so if there's nothing there, it will display the empty state. So we did this last week, and if there's some, and then it will display this button as well. And this button will be for adding a new invoice, and for adding a new invoice, it will then go to the create invoice path. Okay, So that's good, and we've pushed those changes. So let's try running this. Right, so when you get here, over here, and you refresh this, you'll see when you go to the invoices, there's no invoice. You have that button, create invoice. If you hover over that button over there, you will see at the bottom of the page, it will take you to invoice create. So that's that initial path. And if you go to products and services as well, it's showing the empty state. There's nothing there. Add a new invoice. So you can press this button from anywhere. You can press it from the products page or from the invoice page. So I'm gonna press it from here, and you'll see it takes you to a page. You don't see anything. It just takes you to a page that says create invoice, and you can see the root of the page at the top. This is the URL, and if you look at the URL over here for models, where's our URLs over there? It's the second URL is invoices create build, and there's a slug there. So that's invoices create build, and there's a slug over here. So actually everything went without a hitch, but it doesn't show you anything, but it has happened. And if you want to confirm this HTML that it's displaying should be this HTML over there, which is the create invoice HTML, which is this one over here, which is a blank HTML that just has a title saying create an invoice. You see, so and a button that says go back, and a button that says go back. But if you wanna triple make sure that this invoice was actually created, you can a blank instance of an invoice. You can actually go to your database, to your admin panel. If you go to your admin panel and you look at invoices, you'll see there's an invoice there, invoice B41, B41C. So this invoice B41C is that invoice B41C. So the invoice is actually created. If you click on it, all right, it has the number, which is that number that we created at the beginning. It has a due date. There's no due date. There's no title. The status is current because when we did the model.py, we told that invoice, when you create the instance of an invoice, the default for the status is current, and the default for the payment terms is 14 days. So it just chooses that as a default. And the notes, there's nothing there, but you'll see the unique ID, the slug, and the date created. It was created now 1745 on the 20th of August. So, and also the last updated should be like the same, because it was last updated the same time it was created. So these utility fields have also been defined. So technically what we've done, we have defined a blank instance of an invoice, right? So we're gonna continue our coding from there, where we're gonna now display other things that I think are important to display just in a bit. So to continue from here, I'm gonna work on this HTML, the create invoice HTML. All right, so I'm gonna work on this, and I'm gonna copy and paste code that I've written already. I will show you and I'll take you through it, so don't worry about it. But I think it will be easier for me to paste it instead of typing it in front of you. I tried as much as possible not to type in the video. In some cases I do if I have to teach something important, but HTML is not the purpose of this tutorial. So I'm going to just paste this over here and just add some space, some tab. So you'll see over there, I've added a container. So have a look at Bootstrap 5 documentation, and it's very easy to find. Just Google Bootstrap 5 and you'll find it. And on Bootstrap 5, I've decided to work with containers and some, layout features with cards, so I've decided to go with that card, which will, put everything inside of a nice layout for me. So if you look at our HTML I've added a container fluid, and everything is going to be sitting inside of a card. And then inside of that card, there's a header that just says Skolo Online Invoice Generator. And then after that header, there's a card body. And on the body, I just say add products to your invoice. And then adding products to your invoice, you have this add product button where you can add products. And then you have the table of what those products will look like. So this add product table is exactly the same as what we had on the view products side. Okay, so you just sort of create a a table, a responsive table, and you decide what elements of that table will be, and you iterate through all the instances of that product to display the different rows of the table. We covered this in detail last week. So there's nothing much I'm doing here. But now, if you display, if you run, you'll see this is now referring to products length, right? Which means inside of your view function, you should have products defined and sent to the front end. So currently there'll be nothing on products length, so it's not going to show you anything. We need an ability to create products. So I'm going to work with a modal. I'm going to use a modal because in this specific case, we can use a modal to add products, because now when we add products, we can now, if you look at our products model, when we add products, the only related field is an invoice. And we'll know what the invoice is because we are adding this product inside of the instance of that invoice. So we can refer to that invoice when we add the product, right? This is why we did it like this, to create the invoice first so that we can create the products inside of the invoice. So now, these are all the things we need: the title, description, quantity, price, but we've already defined our forms over there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my client's HTML and look at the modal that I did there. All right. And I'm going to just copy this modal because it's going to be exactly the same modal. All right. So I'm going to copy that modal from there. Okay. And I'm going to paste it at the bottom here, at the bottom, right at the bottom of the page. And the only thing I need to change is the ID on the modal. So the modal that I'm going to be working with here is called add product modal. So copy that and paste it over there so that this will say add product modal, so that when you click that button, this modal comes up. When you do a modal, you must always, okay, in this case, inside of the modal, we have the form, right? So in this specific form, you always have to specify a CSRF token. And then the modal title, okay, I see I had not changed the modal title there. So we're going to call this add invoice product. Add invoice product. And then it says form SP and then save changes close. I'm actually thinking to remove the close button. All right. And I'm going to do the same inside of the client's modal. I'm going to remove the close button and I'm going to change over here to say add new client, client, all right, so that it doesn't, yeah, so then close that. And then this form is no longer a form, it's not just a form. We need to, if you look at our view function, this is now a product form, all right? So this is the form that is coming through from the front end. So when you come into the into the HTML, we can't say form, we need to say product form so that it will find the right form. So it will put in that form in there as P, and then you'll be able to, this is a button submit to save changes and add those products. And when you add those products, they should display on this table when the length is greater than 0. When there's no length of the products, nothing will display. But these products are currently, because there's nothing will display there. But as soon as we add the first product, it should be displaying on that table over there. And then the other thing that we need to do now is that to process that form. So to process the form over here, we need to then write the post function. Okay, so to write the post function, I don't remember these things off by head. So I'm going to go back to my reference. You see, I use it a lot. Normally I use my notes, but today I'm going to use this because I want to show you that you can also go onto this on our website and look at the documentation for Django there, and it's got nice code snippets. So you can paste it. Obviously, it's not cut and paste for everything. You have to use your brain when you're pasting and figure out what it means. So in this specific case, these are the two forms that we have. So I'm going to copy these forms over there. All right, actually, I'm going to copy them before so that I can copy the request.post, because when you come to the post side, your forms now have a request.post argument in there, and it's the first argument in there. So if you have two things to specify in a form, you have an instance and a request.post. The request.post always comes first. Don't put it the other way around. You don't put the instance first and then the request.post later. Then over here, if form is valid, we're going to start by processing the product form. Okay, so we're going to say if product form is valid. If product form is valid, then we're going to create an object. All right. So that object that we're going to create, usually if the form is valid, you can just save it, right? But in our specific case, we can't just save it, because what we want to do is we want to specify the invoice. All right, because this will come from the front end, and then we want to specify this related field of invoice. So that's why we're doing it like that. An extra variable that we want to add to the form before we save it, we do it like that. When we did the other form the last time, we just saved it. All right, so this is the difference. When a form has a related field, you want to specify those related variables rather inside of the view function. So what we'll do here, we'll say object it's not a form, it's a product form. So it's a product form, and save commit is fault. And the extra variable that we're adding in here is invoice. Is it invoice? Let me just copy it. I know I'm moving around a lot, but to prevent typos and doing things again, product invoice is equals to invoice. And that invoice is defined there. It's defined there as well. So I shouldn't get an error with that. And then after that, you can save, and then you want to reroute to the same page that you're in. So you want to reroute to the same page, and this time you can reroute to that page because you have the slug, right? So you want to reroute to the same page. You actually want to just copy this redirect. All right, so you want to reroute to the same page. All right, and the slug is now the slug, because in this specific case we have the slug. And the message that you give them, you can just say action, not action. What are we doing here? What are we adding here? We're adding product, invoice product, added successfully. Cool. So what should happen here is that if the form is valid, you'll get this form. It will save, but it won't commit, so that you can add the invoice, and then you can save the form after that, and then you will send a success message, and then you'll return to the create build invoice page, and you have the slug, which has already been defined up there. You'll be able to get that page properly. And then this context forms here must look like that. You're sending the product and the invoice forms. So those are the forms you're sending. And then if there's a message error, error processing your request, and then you return render, the render must be exactly the same as the render here. Return render over there. You see now how we're doing this. Now this is how you can use this standard code. It gives you a structure of how things look like, even though you're gonna write your own variables based on what you're doing. But I find this quite useful. Even I go here a lot if I wanna, get like code snippets of what I've done in the past, so I don't have to open like 100 projects to remember how I did this in a different project. And I will grow this as we go along and as we do more tutorials, so that ultimately I'll grow this into a like a one-stop, code snippet, like reference place for Django. I think because I used to do so many Django projects, I need this. Even for myself, I use it myself. So once you've done that, let's just look at it quickly. If the form is valid, it should save that form and redirect you there. If there's no errors in this, and there's no error in our form, we haven't tested our form yet to see if there was errors. Okay. And yeah. Let us then run it. I'm going to save it. And then I'm going to push my changes. Cool. All right, so let's give it a moment. This is a bit slow, so I'm going to just restart it. Usually it should just pick up and restart, and there's no errors, which means there's no typos, but there's only one way to find out. I'm going to go into this, just refresh the very same page we were on. Okay, refresh it. All right, so now that HTML has changed, and you see now that add product, this should now be linked to a modal. There you go. You can add a title. I know this looks terrible. The styling looks bad. And I've showed you how to style when I did that login form. So what I've showed you here when I did the login form models, what was it, the forms? What I did over there where you can specify form control and all of those things. I've shown you how to do that for that one form, but I won't have the time to do this for every single form because we'll never finish this course. Okay, so for now, bear with the styling. In your own time, just look at what I did in that first tutorial and you can just replicate that. So for the title of the invoice, I'm gonna call this, I don't know, who are we invoicing here? I don't know, monthly. No, actually, this is not the invoice, this is a product. Okay, so what are we selling? Let's say we are selling Word website design. Create a WordPress, from scratch, including our own themes and templates. And templates. The quantity, let's say it's just one. The price is, we're charging them 200 rands, and the currency you can pick between ZAR and USD based on the form. All of that is there. And then let's save changes and see. Awesome. Right. So we've got our title, our description, our quantity, our price. So this is the products that are going to go into the invoice. Okay. And the related invoice over here, there's nothing being shown, but it's because I haven't put it inside of the HTML, right? So related invoice, I just left it blank, all right? So what I need to put over here is to say product. So now I can access the related invoice, product dot. So if you look at your model, you can access the invoice, and then once you access the invoice, you can choose what you want to show. So let's say you invoice number. Yeah, let's do the number. So product.invoice.number, so that we can see the invoice number in that column, right? Let's do that quickly. Right, okay, so give it a moment. Let's just restart it if it doesn't restart by itself. Right, so restart it there, and then there you go. So you can see the invoice number being shown over there. So what we can, and the invoice number should technically be the same for all the products we're going to do because they're all related. And later on with Bootstrap styling, you can figure out how to display this table that it doesn't squash things like that, So you can, there's ways around it. You can give it like a certain, a column, styling sort of percentages, but I won't do that now and waste your time. So we're going to call this again and call this an e-commerce website. Create an e-commerce website. For the clients with 50 drop shipping products. All right. And then quantity, let's say we're going to do 2 e-commerce websites, and this one is a little bit more. It's 5,000 rand, and it's in ZARs as well. Save changes. So now we've got 2 products that we've added to this invoice. Both are related to the same invoice. Now let's build the rest of the page here so that you can edit all the other invoice information and print out your invoice or send it out or do whatever, add your client, so the next thing we want to do is to add the client and then add other product information and print it out, right? So let's do that next. Okay, so now the next part is to include the rest of the forms. If you remember, we have a couple of forms here that we're going to be working with. The client selection form. There's a couple of forms, and I've done a lot of that, but I'll take you through it step by step. But I noticed something as I was submitting a form. Initially, you'll see now it's showing this messages reporting at the top of the page there. This wasn't there before, even though inside of our views.py file we were specifying what the messages were. This is just from habit. I wasn't displaying the messages in the actual HTML. You have to send the messages from the server side, but you have to receive them from the HTML side so that you can display. So these messages, ideally, we want to display them inside of an alert box. So if you go into Alert Bootstrap, this is what an alert box looks like. So you can just copy the code for an alert box over here. But you'll see that the messages that we're sending out are different. Sometimes we send a success message. Sometimes we send an error message. We could send an info message. We could send all sorts of messages based on what we want to display to the client. But typically with this type of web designs, you normally only want to send a success or an error message. There's no reason why you want to send any other like info messages to the front end, unless if you were still building the website. But so we're gonna just focus on two types of messages. So what we're going to do now is, you'll see the way that Bootstrap messages work is that, if it's success, you'll say messages.success. If it's an error, you'll say messages.error, like that. This is the correct way to display it. But your Bootstrap classes, you have alert primary, and then you have alert danger. So you have to find a way to map this type of message to this type of alert, okay? And the best way to do it is on the settings.py file. So that's exactly what we did. So I did this off camera. If you go to the settings.py file, you can just paste this this message tags code in there, and I think I've included it inside of our documentations for Django. So if you go into Django documentations and you go to Django settings, I have here typical settings for your settings.py file, and over there I've got messages tags. If you use this messages tags like that, you're basically saying, if I have a debug message, use info. If I have info, keep using info. But if it's success, use success, and warning is warning, but error is danger. This is like the different naming conventions, right? And you can do it with whichever you want. But in my case, I instead worked with alert info, alert success, alert warning, alert danger. And then I will then map this into the messages itself. So then if you, for example, let me copy and show you how this would work. So if you then have an alert like that, you would then have, let me just paste it, I'll delete it. So in this HTML, and you want to display this alert. So you have alert secondary. So this alert secondary will represent the message tag that you're going to get. It's going to be the message tag. So you can remove this and replace it with a message dot tag, right, to match this message tag that you get there. So this will be like alert warning, alert danger, alert what. And then over here, this will be the message itself, the message that you've typed. So you can replace this with message, right? So then you can place this anywhere inside of your HTML where you want the messages to show. The best place to place this is inside of your where am I? The best place to place it is inside of your partials base.html file, where you have absolutely nothing. Where you are sort of like, represent where all your HTMLs feed from, so that you don't have to put it on every single HTML page. If you have it on your base.html, you only have to paste it once. So if you go to the base.html, I've decided to put it just outside of the main block. So you'll see where the main of the page starts. And inside of the main, I've added it there for message and messages. If messages are there, I've just placed that div in there with the message tags and the message. And then inside, I've added alert main. So there's a bit of a change between this and what you had in the code before, which you might want to change quickly. If you're following along, initially, all of this whole main block was inside the different templates. So this block main and block was outside of the main But if you do it like that and you put the messages then outside of the main, they don't display properly. So what I've decided is to put the entire main block in the base, and then inside of the main block, then display the messages. And then after that, then put all of this block main and block. So you have to then change your HTML as well. So if you're working with like this dashboard HTML, for example, this dashboard HTML block main started with main over here. So this inside of base, where's the base now? I think I've closed it. So inside of base over here, this was inside of the different templates. So this was inside of the dashboard. So this was in here. So this was in here, and then you had the end main on the other side like this. Right? So this was like this initially. But now because I've moved the main into the base template, I don't need to replicate it again here. So go into all your templates and delete this main end block, because now it's included once off inside of your base HTML. It's in there, and then the block goes in there after the messages tag. Right? If you don't want to show messages, you don't have to do this. But if you want to show messages, you can make those changes. But I'll have this code available as well, and then you can compare the code that you've got with the code that I'm going to do. So that's it, done with the messages. So in that specific case, and every time you have a message, you should be able to see it display at the top there. If it's going to be an error message, it will show red. If it's a success message, any other color, it will show based on how you define it inside of your view function over there when you call that message. And another thing as well that is easy to forget, inside of your HTML file, just make sure you import Django contrib messages at the top over there. That's something I forget all the time, and then but you'll get an error saying message not defined, and then you'll remember, oh, I need to import it. And then if you get that error, then just remember to import the messages. So then inside of our HTML now, if you look at the create invoice HTML, we've done a couple of things here. We had just this table here where you were showing the products, and you could add a new product. So we've added a new row underneath, and we've put all of this into a row. So this card was just the card body was like that, and then we had initially the H5 directly after the card body. So you'll see I've added a row so that I can put things in rows and organize my HTML inside of rows, so that things don't clash into each other and have sort of like layout issues. So it's just good practice to do it like that. If you're going to have more than one element in an HTML, one after the next, it's just good practice to put it inside of a row and a column, even if it's just one column, because then the next thing you will put it into the next row, and then it will just help out with the layout issues, and things won't like fall all over the place. So now I've added all of that, the code that was here before, I've put all of it into a row and a column LG12. It's just one column, one row, but at least it helps me to organize. Then at the end of this row, I've put a break, although typically the best thing to do is to put margins, to put like margin bottom, margin top, but I don't have the time to go check what the coding is for this Bootstrap template. I'm just going to put a break. And then after that, then I'm going to put another row after that break, and then inside that row now I want to organize into two columns. So I want to have like two layouts there, and then in the first column I'm going to display my invoice form, which is going to be this form over here, forms.py. So the invoice form is going to be this form over here, where it's this form where they can select the due date, and they can select like the this form, the number, the due date, the patterns and everything. But there's something more we are doing in this form, and it's going to help us with our layout issues. Okay, and I'm going to explain this to you later. But basically what I'm doing here is I'm putting that form, and then I have another column. And then in the second column, you'll see now, you can select a client to add, and then I've got a client form. So I'm adding two forms now. Okay, in the same view function, I'm adding two forms, and I'm going to do it all at once. I want to go through this quickly because a lot of it is quite repetitive, but so you don't miss a step, just like, listen carefully what we did here. Crispy invoice form, and then we've got the client form. You'll see the way this form is displayed is slightly different. So what we're doing here, if you remember the way our forms used to look, everything was just in a straight line, because when you use forms, especially when you use form SP or you just use form crispy, what happens is that the forms just get displayed in a straight line. Everything is just a straight line, like boom, 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 one after the other. And sometimes, especially if you're going to display in this specific format, you might want to move, to have like a row and two columns, and and like show things differently, so that this comes there and this comes there, and then it fills that whole space, because it just looks better that way. So what I've done is that I've got this code snippet as well in my documentation. So if you go under forms and form with initiation variables, this is complex forms, you can initiate your form with the layout options. But this only works if you have crispy forms. Okay, so but if you're following along with this tutorial, you would have crispy forms because we installed it earlier on using it when we displayed the login page with a crispy form. So you can just you don't have to download it again. It's the same package. You must just at the top of your file, of your form file, which is this one over here, at the top, just import these things, crispy form helper, layout, submit, row and column. And I'm going to link this layout documentation for crispy forms. Then you can see how this works, and there's different layout options and things you can do that's much more complicated than what I'm doing. But basically what it does is it really simplifies the job of a developer, so that you don't have to, when you're laying out your form, to have to to have to like do these things one by one, especially if you're going to be replicating the same form in multiple places. You're going to design the layout of the form in the form class. Then whenever you display the form, you just display it as a form, and then it will be laid out the way it's laid out here. So what you need to do there is to you can copy this. You can copy this what we have over here, layout, this init, just so everything from here, all right, is what I'm working with. So you first of all you initiate the form helper, and then from helper layout you then define the layout, and you define it the way you would do it on HTML. You define rows and columns, and you can have column 6, a row, column 4, column 6, column 2. It's up to you how you want to do it. Right. So what I'm going to do here is I've done, you need to start with the super for the form, and then after that you do the form helper. All right, so self helper is form helper, and then you're going to have self helper layout. You're going to create a layout object which starts there and it ends here. So inside of that layout object, you can then define the rows and the columns. So the first row that I have is a title, because I want the title to display in its own row like that. Then after I have the title like that, then I want the row, and I have a row. The next row I want 2 columns, a column MD6, and the first one is a number and a due date. These numbers that you have here, or these strings that you put here, is as you've defined them inside of your fields. So these are field names. So you can put the field name number, the field name due date, and then you can define a CSS class if you have it. And then after that you have row. The second row comes after the first row, and in that second row I want payment terms and status both in column MD6s, which is what we have here. The invoice number and the due date, and then the payment terms and the current status. It's the next row, and then finally the notes, I want it in its own row. So you could have said row and then put notes in there if you had some sort of class to define for the row, or you could just put notes like it is like that. It's really up to you. Then you must, when you use a form like this, you must always use submit. So having the submit button outside of the form is not going to work when you use this type of form. You have to specify a submit variable, which is submit, and then you can put the text that must go into that button. In this case, it's edit invoice. So you put that text in there like that. So if you run this code, when we run it later, you will get a form that looks like this. But I'm still not happy with this form. I actually want it to look even better than this. So I want to use the classes. I want to specify the HTML classes, and I'm going to do it just for this form because I can see this one has got the classes specified, but these ones are not. But it's because the due date was actually specified separately there with the class form control, because I had to extend the date field at the top there, date input. All right, where is it? I had to date input, I had to extend it. So then I might as well just do form control, but I'm going to do it for all the other variables. So I'm going to copy all of these variables like this, title, and I'm going to come over here at the top before due date. All right, and I'm going to paste that over there, and then I'm just going to remove all of these. Right, this is why I don't like to write the code in front of you and waste your time. But in this specific case, actually I think I want to specifically specify the classes. I want the form to look nicer, right? You'll see the due date is already here at the bottom, so I can remove it from there. So the title is basically like a string, all right? So this is a string, a character field. So I'm gonna go, I actually have inside of my documentation, basic form code. If you go to basic form code under Django forms, you can just like copy and paste these ones. So for a character field, I can just use that. So I'm gonna copy that and paste for a character field. And then I just have to assign what the label should be. The label would be here, invoice name or title, right? And then it will be a form control, a placeholder, enter invoice title. All right, I'm gonna leave the length configs out. I don't need those for now. All right, and then let's just put that side. So I've specified that it's not required, but perhaps let me turn this to true because I want to know when this form is getting submitted. And then the number, what is the number? The number is a let me have a look at my forms over here. The number is also a string field, so I can actually basically just use the same. But I actually don't want to display the invoice number because I don't want someone to be able to change it. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to remove this invoice number there from the form. And I'm going to remove it over here as well. Okay. And I'm going to remove it from over there as well. Actually, I'm just going to replace the number with the title, right, in the layout so that I don't change too much. Yeah. So remove the invoice number. Number is not there. Status notes. Remove it from over there. Yeah. Payment terms. Payment terms is a drop down. So if I go into here and I look for a drop down option choice field, you can use this. Right, so let's do the drop down over there, and it's a forms.choice field. The choices is the options, so I need to define these options over here. What are these options? Let me look at my models and see what's defined for the drop down for the terms. It's this. So this is where you have like the 14 days, these are the terms. Yeah, so I'll just define that in the forms as well. All right, 14 days, 30 days, 60, and so forth. So that's the options over there. Required is true. All right, the label is select payment terms, and then form control. All right. Then the status is the same thing. The status also is a choice field. So I can basically just copy what I've got over here. All right, I'm gonna copy exactly what I've got over here, but of course the options can't be the options again. I can't use the exact same options. So instead of the options, I'm just gonna say state options. So status options, and then I'm gonna call this a status options. Is this correct? Yeah, paste in there. Require true, select invoice or change. Rather, let me say change because there will be a default, and if the invoice status changes, all right, you can change it there as well, and it will be form control and require true. And these status options, let's go into the models and find what they are. All right, it's these ones here, so we're just gonna paste them there. All right, current overdue or paid, and then the notes is gonna be a text area field sort of. So let's see, do I have anything for like I've got a tiny MCE, but I didn't import tiny MCE in here. I don't have the text area. All right, so what I'll do for the text area, I can always check the Django documentation. Text area widget. Text area widget, and search in here. There you go. So it's like this, text widget.text area. All right, So notes is forms.character field, it's widget.text area. But you know, the reason why I like to use my own formats is that I've already like added all the things you need, because once you select the widget, you can also select the attributes, right? The text input. So in here, you can enter the attributes to be form control. Where is it? Yeah. So you can enter the attributes in there. Form control, just make sure that's correct. And you can put a comma there. So you don't need a comma. You can put it's required and the labels. The Django documentation doesn't have that for you. And then put that in there. So it's required true, and the label should be, enter any notes for the client, right? And then that's it. Then that's due date. Okay, so I think I've title, payment term, status, notes, due date, title, due date, payment term, status, notes. So that's okay. And that's the other thing, the nice thing as well about doing this in the form, in the model class. This is good practice to do all of this layout and classes design inside of the model field, because if you had a situation where you had to use this form in multiple places, like let's say you can enter an invoice here, but maybe you wanted this form also somewhere inside of your dashboard, like a quick, modal, enter your invoice, a new invoice, right? You wouldn't want to go through your whole code base and find everywhere your form is when you decide I want to remove this, like we just removed now the model, the number, so we decided we don't want the number anymore. We just removed it from the form class and redesigned the layout. If we had this specific form in 4 different locations in your HTML code, and you had designed the layout inside of the HTML, you would have to go and change it in all those places. And then you would forget 1 or 2 places and end up with different looking forms. So that's why it's good practice to design your HTML and your layouts inside of the form class. So I'm going to save this, and I'm not going to display it now because I still have to show you a couple of things because it's not ready to be displayed. We still have to do it inside of the view function, which is the next step that we're going to do. All right. So the view function, if you go to the view function over here, we've now added all these new forms. We've got the invoice form, which is the invoice form, the one we just worked on now. And then we've got the client select form. All right. So the client select form is an interesting one because this is a form. This is this form over here. This one. It's a drop down menu of the different clients we have already. Right? So there are a couple of things you have to do to get this form to work. You need to be able to call and find all the client instances, and then you have to feed them into your form initiation. So you also have to write this into the form initiation. So I've got code for this as well, because under form with initiation variables, the first code snippet here shows you how to initiate a form which actually takes an outside variable. So this is an example of a form which needs to come up with a select field, but this select field depends on an input variable into the form. Like, let's say you were designing a situation where this client select form, you only wanted clients that are from Joburg, for example, and then you would do the query outside of the form because you don't know inside of the form what area is going to be. So you would have the areas outside, and then you would feed that into the form, and then you would use it to then do a query inside of the form, which is filtered query based on the input. So but in our specific case, you can copy this code, but ours will be simpler because we're just going to get all the clients. We're not filtering based on anything, so there won't be anything we have to input outside of the views. So if you go to our forms, for the client select form, which is this one over here, it's much simpler than the code there, but you can read that code and it's similar to it. I mean, in principle, it's similar, but it's simpler this one because we're not inputting anything into the form. So basically, the init, you're going to override the init method of the client form, same way we've overridden the init method of the client form here, and you always do it before the meta, class meta. Same thing we're doing over there. But here we override that method to design a form layout. But over here, we are overriding the method to input select fields for the drop down menu, because the drop down menu is sort of like the items that are going to go in there must be put in there dynamically based on how many clients we have. So we can't actually code this into the models file, because when we create the model, we don't know how many clients we have. Actually we do, because we can call the thing in the models file, but actually it's better practice to do it inside of the forms, because actually even if you do it in the models, you will still have to do it inside of the forms. So because when the form renders, it needs to know the options at the time that it's rendering. So what we're going to do here is that we're going to call all the client objects, and then we're going to create a variable inside the form that's called client choices, and it's an empty array for now. Then after we've created an empty array for that, we're going to now iterate through this client list, which is all the client objects from the database. So we're going to iterate client and client list, and then we're going to create a tuple, because you know how when we feed information into a dropdown, we need it in a tuple, because the first part of the tuple is actually the string that's going to be fed into that's going to be selected as the string, and then this is what the client sees. This is like what the client views, because you want the client to view something that makes sense to them. So if it was a client name, you want to show the client name, and then they'll know, oh, this is the client name that I'm referring to. But maybe it might not be ideal to feed the client name into the database, because it's easier to work with the unique ID, because you can then just call the instance that has that unique ID and then fill that. You understand? So what gets sent to the back end is the unique ID, but what the client sees is the form, but they're all related in the same class. And then we append the client choices with that tuple. Then once we've done that, we then run the super on the init form. So in this case, the super runs after you've done this. Over there, when we're initiating, we ran the super first, and then we initiated the helper. So it's different methods, but it's showing you different ways to override the initiate method inside of your form class. I'm teaching you like real complex stuff. This is what like highly paid Django developers get paid thousands and hundreds of thousands of rands to do. And when I do projects on this channel, I don't want to show you how to build blogs, okay? I'm showing you like how to build an actual application that you can go and charge people for. The skills you learn here are skills you can monetize. And that is why I'm showing you all of this, because this is how the professionals or the people do it. Well, a lot of people that I've come across, it's up to you how you want to do things, but a lot of the pros do it like this. You have to, in a lot of the cases, override some of these methods. Then after you've done that, you're going to then specify the client field. So you're going to specify it also inside of there, and then you're going to put the choice field, and then you're going to, the choices is now client choices, which you've defined in there. So you want to call this inside of the init method, because that's where you define your choices based on if it was something that was being input in there. Then after that, you can put your form control, and all your form classes, and then you can call the meta on invoice, and because we're going to do the invoice client. Now, this is something else which is not so obvious, but you got to do this, because if you don't do this here, you have to do it in the view function. And I'd rather do it here because it's much better. Then we are also overriding the clean method, okay? So overriding the clean method is not so obvious. It's not so obvious how it's done, but the clean method is what happens inside of your view function when you run form is valid. When you run form is valid, basically Django in the back end, it runs the clean method. The clean method is standard on all the forms, but if you wanted to process the form before it was saved and you wanted to do some things to the variables, move things around, you can do it inside of the clean method because it's done before the form is saved. So in this specific case, what we want, because this is a select field, this is typically going to be the unique ID of a string. This is going to be a string with a unique ID that's going to be sent to the form clean method. And we can't actually now save this inside of our database because our database expects a client object. You see? So the database expects a client object, and there is no way of actually putting a client object inside of a dropdown because a dropdown is a string. So the only way you can do this is to either do a manual form, which I've done in the past until I learned this overriding of the clean method, is that you get your client ID string. And once you have your client ID string, then inside of your clean method, You get that string, all right, the client, and then you use it to call the client object. And then you return that back to the form. So then the form, when it does the cleaning, it doesn't see the string, it sees the client object, which was gotten based on the string that was selected over there. All right. So this is like some pretty hardcore stuff that you're doing here. I'm not going to repeat it again, but I think you can replay this video if you didn't catch me the first time and hear exactly what I said. And the way you're overriding the clean method, you have to use specific terms. So you can't just call this function anything. You've got to call it clean. And then you've got to call it clean for a specific field. So if you were overriding the client field, you have to call clean client. If you're overriding the client name, you would call it clean underscore client name. So whatever field you're overriding is the one you will call it, but you have to start with clean and then underscore the name of the field you are overriding. And then you just return. And then this actually gets returned back to the clean, and then it then gets saved as a client object. And then you're not going to get an error that tells you, oh no, you can't save a string. And then you can then do it like this. Inside of models, inside of your view function, you can just save the form. Because what I used to do before in the past, before I learned this, I would actually like bring this forth as a string, and then inside of my view function, I would then call all of this in the view function and then edit later on. So I'm showing you different ways of doing it. I've shown you that initially, how you can add things later on, and not include them in the form and add them later on. But how would you know what the client has selected in here? So you can only know that inside of the form once the selection is done, and then inside of the clean method. So once you then you can then edit into the views. That's quite a mouthful, but the last part I want to show you for this before we test this thing out is putting it all into the view function. So inside of the view function, remember we had initially the request method post, and we had just one form here. We've now added multiple forms, all right? And then once you add multiple forms, it adds more complexities, especially since in my forms, which is something that I've done, which is not good practice, but it's something which, I've made everything, not required, because I wanted it to make my job easier. And even in the forms, I've made everything false. So when it comes to the forms, all the forms are going to validate, and then that's a challenge. You have to find a way to only talk to the form that is the proper form. So that's why you'll see over here, I've added some things. I've said, if invoice form validates, right, but and payment terms is in the requested post, which means payment term was also sent with the post. And so that I can differentiate this and that, because otherwise all my forms would validate at the same time, because most of the fields are not required. Yeah, exactly. So then we've added that part to that form. And in this specific case, we've added it to the other form as well. In the product form, this form won't validate if the stuff is not added, because I've made it all required, because I really want, it's an invoice. I don't want somebody to submit a product with fields that are not there. But with these other ones, the reason why I've allowed them to not all be required is because the client can fill in the form in sections. They can do the invoice name today and tomorrow do the status. They might not fill all these things in at the same time. So if I make everything required at once, it just complicates the client's life, even though technically I could do it. But I don't want to do it that way, because I want to make this seamless. Like, you can save and then come back and edit and change things later. So, you will know you won't send an invoice out if you haven't put in like an invoice date, for example. But in terms of the type, these when you add them, I want you to have everything. I want you the price, the quantity. I don't want you won't be able to come later, because you'll see I don't have an edit form, and I won't include an edit form. So you will add the product and it's there. Maybe I'll have a delete button and that's it, because I don't want to overcomplicate the application. Now, once you've done that, that's quite a mouthful. I'll put this code available and you can have a look at it later on, but we can test this. I'm going to save this now, and then I'm going to do my usual pushing. All right. So after pushing the changes, we can go back to over here, and then we can rerun the server. So we need to just do Python manage.py run server. 4 5s. Okay, no errors. There shouldn't be. And we can go back. Remember, this is what the form looked like. It should look a little bit different now that we have added the form controls. So we can just refresh this page, basically. Refresh this page. And you can see this looks completely different. Even though in the HTML, you are technically rendering it the same way you would render it, right? Crisp invoice form, all right? It looks completely different. But one thing to note as well is when you render the form which has layout, right? It's a different method than you would do a form without the layout stuff. So this client form, I'm still using a crispy form filter because I wanted to include the styling and everything, but it's a different display than that, because this, you can see it's inside the curly braces and the percent sign. So this is like Python code, crispy invoice form, because this form includes even the submit. Everything is inside this form, the way we did that. But this is different. This is just like, sort of like putting it through a filter, and you can have the submit button outside. So those, I wanted to just put this next to each other so you can see the difference. But you'll see over here, when you choose a client to add, this is now a drop down. What is showing here is the client names, the way we have it inside of the client list. I don't want to go there now because I won't find this URL again. But maybe I can just copy it, right, so that I don't forget it, because I don't have a route to link me to this thing yet. I haven't built it yet, but once I build it, this won't be necessary. But if I went to my client list, for example, just remember this client, Westeros Refinery Great Tomatoes. If you went to the client list, there, these are the clients we have: Stark Industries, Great Tomato. These are the client name, which is what I did here when I was designing the form, is that I said, show them the client name, and then over here, you're gonna, on the other side, you submit the client unique ID, which is what I used to clean the form over there. So we can actually just go back, and then we will be back where we were before. So once we're here now, let me show you. This was Stark Industry. Let's say we change this to Westeros Refinery, and we add client. You'll see it will say client added successfully, and it has changed. It hasn't changed. It's still Stark Industries. Why is it still saying Stark Industries? After I've changed this to Westeros Refinery. Okay, so something is not quite right with that form. It's validating, but let's see what's validating actually. Let's change that. Let's save that, and then let's change this to Westeros Refinery and add client added to invoice successfully. So if you go over there and you see where that message comes from, client added to invoice successfully. So this is client form.save, and I changed it, but it's not changing the form. Okay, so I finally solved the problem. Took a bit of a while. There's a couple of things. So this one, okay, let me run this. Let me run this so that I can show you what we have done. Okay, so the problem is this. We are overriding the form init method. So when the form initializes, it's doing what is inside of the form init override that we have written. Typically, when you specify the instance of the form should know what the current selected instance is, and it should pick it automatically. It all happens in the Django background because the functions are already written in the init of the form. But we are now overriding it because we want it to do something else, because we want to give it on the fly, dynamically select things that it must do. So we must redesign and rewrite everything that must happen in the init method, because now we've changed the original version. So I tried a couple of things, and eventually this is what worked. Because initially we didn't have this, we just had the client list, and then we were just starting with a blank array, which means every time that form was being called, it was always starting with a blank array, because it was reinitiated every time with a blank list. And then we would call the client list from there, and then we would push the unique ID and the client names based on what's available in the database, and then we would decide what's going to be there. And based on the database call, the list is organized according to what is available inside of the database. So every time it will always the first list on the on the select will always be the first list that gets returned, which means from the client side it looks as if the changes haven't been recorded, but the changes were actually recorded, because if you looked at the background, you can see Grey Tomatoes has been changed in the background. So it's different in the background because the database actually saves that information, but when you display it, when you overriding the init method, you are displaying it by reorganizing how everything looks, so it looks as if the stuff has not been changed. So what I did to fix that, because I still want the client to know what's selected, you must think about always the client user interface. And I want the client to know what has been selected. So what I've done is I've added on the HTML a line here that shows the current client, so the client can see what has currently been selected. And then I've taken the list back to a blank list, because I know the list is going to be populated dynamically every time when the init method is called. So I'd rather not the client rely on this for visual feedback of what is the current selected client, so that they can rather look at that there. And then on the HTML, what I did is that I just, I did like a card title with a badge success, that's all I did. So it's not a big deal, so that the client can see what has been selected there. And then the client can always change their selection if they want, or if they don't do anything here and they don't submit this form, nothing gets done, they can submit other forms, right? But if they do change a selection, like they choose a different refinery, what will happen is that the form will go through the form init method, and then I'm gonna now input an argument into the form, which is the initial client, right? So when you input the initial client, that initial client is something I'm gonna have to specify, so the client knows who the initial client is. And when I input that initial client on the clean method, what I'm gonna do is that if the initial client, or if the value that's selected is 0. So for example, if this form gets selected with a 0, like for some reason, people, how people are, you must be dumb, you must sort of code for like, dumb proof code, because somebody can look at this code and just want to select an empty thing and submit the button. So let's see. All right. If they submitted an empty thing, instead of getting an error, because if you didn't do this, somebody submits an empty button, what would happen is that this would come over there and it would try to go into the clean method, and then it wouldn't be able to fetch a client with a clean, with a dash dash dash. Then it would throw an error, and then it would like crash your app. So instead, what you do is that if the person selected nothing, so they submitted a form with nothing selected, then what you're going to do is that you're going to return the initial client. That's the only reason why we are feeding the initial client into the form. So inside of your views.py, when you initiate the form, which is our client form, just input the initial client as a variable, feed variable into the form, which means that we will have it available inside of the form, and we only use it if the client doesn't select anything and for some reason tries to submit. So then when we clean the form, we return the initial client. But if they did submit something, then we're going to do what we were doing before, which is changing the variable. So if they did submit something here and they changed it, it's Westeros Refinery, they wanted to change it to Stark Industries, and they submitted that. Okay, it's going to change to Stark Industries. And if we look at the database again and we refresh this, all right, we'll see it's Stark Industries in here as well. So the form is working as it should, and these things happen, and it took me a while to figure out what's really happening here, but we got it right. And there's a couple of things you can do here. You see this form, everything's like right close to each other. You can fix this very quickly by adding a margin bottom, but I don't know if this Bootstrap has got margin bottom to it. But if your CSS had a margin bottom, I won't do it here. I'll just show you, and you can do it in your own time. Inside of the form class over there, you can just add margin bottom. Like you can just do MB. Let's actually try it and see. Maybe this has it, So you add MB3 there, and you can add it in there as well. You can add it in there as well. And in all the places and next to the form control class. And you can create some margins. And or you could even do it inside of the row if you wanted. But let me see if this would work, because I don't know if a Bootstrap class has got margin bottom defined. All right. And then it's gonna reload on its own this time. And let's just refresh it and see. Yeah, there you go. So margin bottom is defined and it works fine. So yeah, I think I'm good to go now. I'm good with this. So the last part of the tutorial, what we're going to do is, once we've created the invoice, you see now we went through, I took you through step by step. To be honest, this whole invoicing tutorial could have been this last lecture. But what people don't understand is that 80% of web development is the setting up, to get the templates set up from Bootstrap, to get the layout looking the way you want it, or whatever. Or sometimes you're going to have a front end designer who's going to design this front end for you to look nice the way it should, and to get Django incorporated into all of that and to redesign everything. That takes a lot of time, and sometimes you have to do it as the back end developer. And once you've done that, then the magic of this whole tutorial, this whole 3-part series, is just in this today's lecture, where you're going to create the invoice class and create the invoices and the tasks, the products, and then select the client that goes with it. But we had to do the planning, organizing the models, and have a look at what is the relationships, how does the client model relate to the invoice model, how does the product model relate. So there's a lot of background work you have to do. Designing your forms, these take a lot of time. But designing your models, writing your forms, your URLs, your HTMLs, as a web designer, you're going to spend 80% of your time doing all of that, sort of work. And then at the end, your invoice is ready to go, right? And then what we're going to do here, what I want to do is 2 things. I want to be able to email this invoice to the client. And then I want to be able to view the invoice in PDF before I email. So I want to be able to preview the invoice, what it looks like, and I want to be able to email it, like attach it to an email that I sent to the client. So there are 2 things. So we're going to add 2 buttons here. If you go to your invoice, create invoice HTML over there, where we said add client, there's the form, there's the break over there. We're going to put a break after the form, maybe 2 breaks, or maybe we're not going to put a break after the form. Instead, what we'll do is that we'll put that whole form into a div, and we'll put in a margin bottom 5, and we'll put the form back, and then it'll have space afterwards. And then once we've done that, then we're going to do another row. We're going to do a div row, and then we're going to do another div column. Inside of the row, I'm going to create 2 columns. All right. Column LG6, and then inside this column I'm going to create a button, and then that button I'm going to call it a it's going to be a class is equals to, let's create, like, let's have different colors here so people can see they're doing something different. You can always go to Bootstrap to have a look at your colors. We've used success there. Let's use like a warning and an info, right? So let's say button BTN warning, right? And then this BTN warning is going to be saying view invoice, PDF, just like that. And then once we've done that, we're going to go into, we're going to just paste the same button over there, and we're going to make it a button. Actually, maybe make this an info. And then for the email to client, okay, client invoice. So there'll be 2 buttons. One button you will view the invoice. So one button will be over there and another one over there. Maybe what we can do is that, I don't know if this will work with this template, but I'm gonna try and see. Actually, let's try button block, right? To fill in that whole block. All right, let's see how this looks. And then we can do the rest of it later. Right, okay, so let's restart this manually. It's not picking it up auto. It doesn't always do that. And let's refresh this. Yeah, the button block Don't know why it doesn't work the way I think it should work. Yeah. There's another way, but it doesn't matter. dblock. Yeah, a dblock div. But it doesn't matter. This is okay. But I want the text to be white. Can you put that in there? Text white. I don't know. We'll see it later when we rerun this, but I'm not gonna rerun it now because we're gonna run out of time. So instead of the views, there's two things we want to do now. The first thing that we want to do is be able to view the PDF invoice, and I think that's the first step. Let's just be able to like create and build a PDF invoice. So for that, we're gonna do some coding gymnastics over here. We are now in the last home stretch of this tutorial. I wasn't sure we were going to finish everything in one session, but it looks like we are going to finish everything in one session. I'm going to go a little bit fast in the next couple of minutes because I've pre-written the code ahead of time to save time so I don't go through it as I'm making as I'm typing, but I will explain to you step by step exactly what I've done to finally finish up the website, because I think the majority of the work is done. If we look at where we are now, we've done the products. I've shown you how to add products. We have fixed the form, which inputs information about the invoice. And you're able to select the client that you're going to add to your invoice, change your client as required, and you can feed back to the user what client they've currently selected. The last part of our tutorial is to be able to view the invoice before you send it out. So we need to be able to view the client invoice so that we can make sure everything is fine in a nice format. And then I've also added a button to view the same invoice in PDF format, because this is the format that's going to be emailed out to the client. So these are two different views. This views it in HTML. This views it in PDF. So we're going to create a PDF page of the invoice that we're going to send out. And then finally, when you press this button, that invoice goes out to the client immediately, and the client can see that invoice sent out to them, and they can action it and so forth. So we're going to cover all of these in the next couple of minutes. But before we do that, before we can view and email the client out, remember when you're looking at an invoice, it's got two parts to it. It's got the address of the client, and then it also got the address of the user. So that part we haven't done. I think we're going to start with that. In able to set up the invoice, we need to be able to have our own personal settings. And if you recall, when we did our models, at the bottom of the model, we created a model here called settings. And the whole point of this model was that we would be able to input information into the database about the settings of the person who's sending the invoice out. If later on you decide to have multi-tenant website, you can actually expand this website later on to be multi-tenant if you want, so that you can have different companies doing different invoices. You would be able to then input that information under settings, and then when you create the invoice, you could select who the sender is going to be, the way we've done it here. But I'm not going to show that, because you can just expand this code and replicate what's here and add maybe another session part here that says add the sender or the company that's sending the invoice if you had multi-tenants, for example. Or you would figure out how to do that. But in this specific case, we're going to do this manually in the back end, so that the website is fixed and nobody can change it on the front end. Because typically, if this was an organizational type invoice creator, those settings about the company information would be fixed. They wouldn't change all the time. So that is not something you would want to be able to fix in the front end. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to the back end of this website, to the admin side, and I'm just going to create one model instance of the settings model that will then be used inside of our invoices every time we send an invoice as the company information. So I thought I had that done. Yes. So this is the admin part of the same website. So you should be able to log in as admin because we created yourself as a super user. You go into the settings model over there, right? And then when you get there, you're just going to add a setting, right? So you can click this button to add a setting, and then you can just add your company information that must be used in this invoice. And then when you're done, click save. So my specific case, I've already done it. And if you click over there, this is the settings that I've already done. I've added this address information, 467 Church Street in Gauteng. This is my email address. And I've added a text number over there, a random text number. And then as soon as you save, all of that is created for us. And then the only thing I want you to remember is the client name. So just copy that, because we're going to use it in the next part of the tutorial. When we fetch this settings instance, we're going to fetch it based on the client name. So once you do that, when you go back to the views, I've actually created a new view for this page. If you look over here, we've got this page that is called company. This page is where we're going to display to the user what the settings are, so that at any given point the user knows what the settings are, but we're not going to put in a form there for them to edit it in the front end. You would have to edit it in the back end. So what I've done is that I've created at the bottom a new URL for company settings, and then over there you just do if you retyped it, you just do company is equals to, you go to settings, you go to objects, you go to get, you get objects, and then you get objects that have a client name, right? That's equals to that client name that you just copied. So I asked you to copy the client name inside of the dashboard, this client name, whatever it is, you just paste it up there. So this is the line of code that we have here. We go into the settings, we get in the client name that's equals to Skolo Online Learning. That's all we're doing. It's actually a quick hack of doing this. In reality, you might not do it like this. You might allow the user to change the information in the front end, and I don't know, it's up to you. Then once you've done that, then you're just going to pull it to the context, and then you're going to send it to the front end so that we can create this HTML that's called company settings.html. So if you go to company settings.html there, it's just an HTML file that we've created. Inside of this HTML file, we just added a container and a card and a card body. So the rest, it still extends partial space, right? And it just has that heading at the top that says company settings. And then, you're going to put a container, a card, and a card body. Inside the card body, we're going to have the row, and we're going to have two columns. The first column, we're going to put a card title that just, puts the client name, address, province, postal code information, so this information is just the same what you have inside of your models file. So inside of your models file, the same information, we just sort of feedbacking that information to the client, the address, so they know what it is. So this page is not going to have a form, you're not going to be able to edit anything. We're just going to display back to the client what the settings are. And then we're going to have an image just to add some bit of flavor to that page. So you can save this. And once you've saved that, let's run our server is running. And then if you go to our website and you refresh this website, and then you go to company, you will see I've already pushed these changes. It just shows the company name and the address. So this address and all of this information is exactly the same as what you have there. So if you changed it here, and let's say change your address to 33 Rivonia Road, and you changed the postal code to 2100, and you saved it inside of the admin panel. On the front end, it will change as well, because this is pulling that information from the admin. That makes sense to you. So I think that's going to be enough for the company settings page. We're going to save that information once off in the admin side, and that will be the information that goes into the invoice as the client information. Then we can go back to our invoices. Let's see, using the back button. So when we get to the invoices, now what we want to work on is to view the client invoice. Okay, there's a HTML available for this. If you remember the very first time, I don't know if I still have this file here. I don't think I have it, so I'm not going to go into it now. It's there in my HTML. The very first time when I was showing you the templates we're going to work with, there was a template for a blank invoice that was in that template set. I think it should be in our GitHub as well. That's the template I'm going to work with to create this client invoice. Nonetheless, don't worry, I have it in here. So it's called create invoice HTML. No, it's not that one. It's this one. All right. So this template is pretty self-sufficient. It has the styling built into it. All right. And and it just creates a nice looking type invoice, and it will be there inside of our GitHub. So when I push these changes to GitHub later on today or tomorrow, this template will be there. So this is the template we're going to work with. It's called invoice template or HTML. We're just going to organize that invoice information in a simple format for people to be able to see it. All right, so the template was already pre-done. I just had to populate my invoice information. So you'll see, basically, if you go through the template, there's a part for an image. Okay, and when it comes to the image over there, the logo that goes into the template, I'm going to use a logo that's hosted not on my virtual private server. I'm going to use a logo that's hosted on HTTPS because it's just easier working with this type of documents, especially if you're going to email an invoice out. It's easier to have all of that information hosted somewhere else, because when whoever displays that page, whether it's in an email or wherever, whether it's an email address, they can pull that invoice from that image from where it's sitting. So this works similar to the email templates. When you're working with email templates, you want to always try and put the HTML inside of the template itself, and then if you have image files, you want to host them on HTTPS, not on your server, because when you send this invoice out, the image is going to remain behind on your server and it's not going to go with it. So the best way is to, I know this is not the template I sent because later I decided not to send this template, but these are just good practices, FYI. So what we're doing is that we just created a view function, and then over there, the P settings, this is our settings. All right, so this is a client information, the client name, the invoice number, the created date, the invoice due date, so this is typical information that goes into an invoice. All right, so the first thing you need to do to create this page, as usual, you start with your URLs. So on your URLs, you're going to create a new URL over there. There's 3 URLs to cover the 3 pages that we're going to be making. The first one is a URL just to view the document. I know I called it PDF invoice because I thought that would be the PDF file, but this is actually just the file where you view the invoice. You can rename it later. The next route is to view the PDF document itself. And then the last route is to email the invoice. So these are 3 routes that you can go ahead and create right now. These routes are going to match these 3 buttons that's here. The first button is just to view the invoice right here on the system. The next one is to view the invoice in PDF format, the actual PDF document that's going to be sent out. And the last one is to email that client with this invoice attached to the email as you email the client. So this one is the easiest one. So this is the HTML that I'm talking about. So let me just show you how we've done the view file. So if you just, highlight that, and we go into our views document. Let's find this view function. All right. So this view function over here, basically what we're doing is that we start by fetching the invoice of the slug. So if you look at the URLs, you will see that for all these routes, you need a slug. Okay, the slug is to identify the specific instance of the invoice that you're talking about. All right, so this is why when we did our models, we have slugs everywhere. Remember, when we did our invoice model, we've got the slug. All right, this slug is really useful for navigating and routing, because if you don't have the slug, the only other way to identify an instance of the model you're working with is using the default Django numbering system, which is every time you create an instance, it starts from 1, then it goes to 2, 3, 4, and then you'd have to access it via the PK, okay, the primary key of the invoice, which is of the instance, and the numbers start from 1 to 10, and you never know what 1 is, what 2 is, what 3 is. Later on, when you're going to have a lot of records, it's going to be hard to identify which one was 1, which one was 2. So when working with slugs, in the slug, we will create the slug by using the invoice number and the unique ID. So at least you'll have something, the invoice number, which might make sense to you as a user especially if you had printed out the invoice. Then you can, when you're looking at the slug, it makes a little bit more sense. The slug is also what we have over here. So instead of just having a 1 and a 2 and a 3 over there, I think it's easier to work with this. And later on, you can even change the slug to include the title of the invoice, but I think we use the number because we didn't want the slug to change a lot, and then we don't allow the user to change the number in the front end so that the slug will always be the same. but you can actually use the title as well and it will work just as well. Now, we're going to use now the slug to identify the instances of the invoice. Now, when we go to our views, we are going to fetch that invoice based on the slug, which means when we create the URL the first time, we're going to have to send the slug with the URL. And then we use the slug on the view function over here. You've seen this before, so this is not new. And again, remember, every time you get something inside of Django, you can throw an exception if this slug doesn't exist, for example. So to just handle that exception, I'm going to put this inside of a try except block. All right, and then after we get the invoice number, we're going to get the products that are associated with that invoice. All right, so we've done this before, even in the create view. This is exactly the same thing. We fetch the products that have that invoice, and then we fetch the P setting. The P settings now are the settings of the company that is creating the invoice, our settings. So these are the settings that are sitting over here that we created in the background over there. All right, so we're going to call it P settings because you don't want to name something settings in Django, because your settings is generally referencing these settings over there, but I still want to call this settings because I want to remind myself what this is, company settings. So I'm just going to put a P in front of settings to differentiate this, because if you call this settings, you're going to have a lot of errors inside of your code later on. It's problematic. You mustn't rename any variable settings inside of Django, but P settings will be fine. Then after that, I'm just going to do a quick calculation of the total, because inside of an invoice, you have to show the total, all right? And the total is just going to be an addition of all the product prices in here. So all the products that we have, they have a quantity and a price. So you have to multiply the quantity and the price to get the total line item, and then you have to add them all up to get the total invoice amount. All right, so what we're doing there, we're just now iterating through the products. If the length of the products is greater than 0, we're going to iterate through the products, and we're just going to take the quantity and the price and multiply them together, and then we're going to take that invoice total and add it up to make an invoice total here. So this is just simple maths. Then once you've done that, we're sending all these variables to the front end. Okay, your invoice, your products, your P settings, which is my company settings, and then the invoice total. Then this goes into that invoice template HTML, which is this template here. All right, so at the top there, we're going to have the client name, which is our client name, inside of the P settings. This is our settings. All right, and then we have the invoice number, which is invoice.invoice number. The invoice date is invoice.invoice date, and then I'm going to use a filter, an HTML filter called date. All right, so this template filters are standard with Django, so you don't have to import it at the top there. This comes standard with Django. You can use it. It just takes this, because it's a datetime object. Instead of displaying it as a datetime object, it displays it as a proper date. And if you wanted to display it in a different format, you can create your own invoice filter that will do that. But I think this one is sufficient. And then I'm going to show the due date, but this was a date object, not a datetime, so I don't have to put a date filter on that. And then after that, we'll have the client name. This is just all your address information from the setting side and from the client side. And remember, from the client side, we can access the client information from the invoice, because when we created the invoice over here, we added the client as a related field. So the client that's associated with the invoice, we can access that client from the invoice.client.client information. So all of these, which is available in the P settings, you can get it for the client by accessing the client variable inside of the invoice. All right, that's why here we're not actually sending any client information, because it's included inside of the invoice. This is why it makes more sense to use the client as a related field to the invoice, and then every time you have an instance of an invoice, you will always know who that related client is, and you can get that information, the client name, text number, and so forth. So that's what we're doing over here inside of the HTML. And then after that, we're just going through the items of the products. All right, so we're going to the product in products. We're now going to iterate through the product list, and the product list is sent over here, the products. Okay, this is a list, because when we're fetching it from the database, we say product objects filter. Every time you do product objects filter, you bring back a list item. If it's empty and you don't get anything, like for example, if there was no products for this specific invoice, which we got via that slug, it would bring an empty array it would bring a 0. It will still bring an array with nothing inside the array. And if there's something inside that array, it will then bring the list of that array. That is why when we're doing this calculation, we just first of all do a quick check that the array is not empty so we don't get an error. All right. So over here, this is going to be a list, and we can then iterate through that list: the product title, quantity, the currency, and the price. Currently, I'm not doing a check to check that the currencies are going to be the same, so that when I add up, I'm adding up everything according to the same currency. I'm assuming people will use common sense and they will not put inside of one invoice products with different currencies. But technically it's possible. If you looked over here when you were adding a product, you could change the currency here and it's a different currency. All right, and then you have products with different currencies over there. All right, so when I'm doing the adding inside of the views, I'm not doing that check. In reality, probably what you would do in reality, you would have the currency set once inside of the settings. All right, and then here you wouldn't change it. It would be the same currency every time. But I'm showing you how to be able to change it inside of the product, because what you would want is that for every single invoice you would be able to change the like if you wanted to do an invoice in US dollars, you could then change it, and then this whole invoice would be in US dollars. All right, but in this specific case, I'm not gonna do the currency conversions. It's for, you can do that later if your use case requires it. But I'm expecting that one person is gonna be using one currency all the time, and then you can actually just set it once inside of the company settings. Then once I've done that, back to the invoice template, we're gonna add everything up. This invoice total amount that we're sending to the HTML comes from here inside of the views. It's that invoice total that where is it? It's that invoice total. All right, and then when we send it to the front end, we just do like this is like a string format, because we're working, every time you do calculations, just a quick tip: always remember what is stored as a string, what is stored as a number that you can do calculations with. Ideally, I like to store things in my database as strings, right? So that I don't complicate my database configuration. And then when I do a calculation, I just remember to change that back to a float, so that I can do a calculation, because you can't do a calculation with a string. But in this specific case, I think we did store it as a number anyway, if I recall correctly. So if you go to products, let's just double check that. The currency is an R, and the price was a float field. Okay, so we did store it as a float field. We could have done this calculation anyway, right? But just to be on the safe side, in case you didn't store it as a float and you're not sure, I changed it quickly as a float, and then I do the calculation. All right, so this number initially, you'll see it's a 0. In Python, you don't have to specify the data type when you're creating it. Okay, that is one of the things I love about Python. That's different with other programming languages. Every time you specify something, you have to specify the data type. In Python, you can just give a variable and what it is, and Python will know this is a string because I put a dot there. If I put a 0 there, Python would have known this is an integer. All right, and if I had put a 0 like that, all right, Python would have known this is a string. Like if I did that, Python will just know that's a string. I don't have to specify what it is. But in this case, I want an integer. I mean, a float, so I must put a dot next to it to tell Python this is a float. That means that when I add up these numbers, this result will be a float, and that will be a float as well. So it's possible that you'll have maybe 10.345678 or 3, and you don't want to show numbers like that inside of your invoice. You want to format it to at least 2 decimal points. So that's what I'm doing there. This percentage 2f formats to 2 decimal points. Whatever result you get there, if it was a complicated long float number, you will always have it with 2 decimal points when you send it to the front. So that's what this is doing there. And then the invoice total will be displayed like that. So I think we can then test this. All right, let me just make sure my server is still running. And when I just restart this page to make sure, yes, it is running. And if you press this button, I've already linked this button to the URLs, and you remember how to do that. If you go to the URLs, you just double check this view PDF, this URL, whatever you called it over here, and you would go into your HTML, which is the invoice, which is this HTML, I think. Right, and then you have the buttons at the bottom there, and then you would put that URL there, and then you have to give it the slug, because the URLs, these URLs, they need a slug. All right, slug is equals to slug. So you have the slug, you can access it via invoice.slug. You'll see all of them have slugs so that it knows which invoice you're talking about. Even though you are in that instance now, the URL still needs that slug, and then you can view the client invoice. That's the button there. So if you press that button, this is the viewing page. It just views the invoice currently. So you'll see that's my logo. This logo is going to be fixed. It's not going to change. As your company, you're not going to be changing your logo all the time. So I've hard coded this logo in, and then you'll have the different addresses. This is the address of the client. This is your address, which is accessed via P settings. All right. Where is that invoice now? Views. This is invoice template. It's that one over there. It keeps disappearing. So this is the client information. The client name is that one there. No, there. And then no, this is your settings information, which is this one over there in the settings page. This is the client information, is Great Tomatoes, and this is the client email address, and these are all the different items, and you can see this adds them up. I have to double check my math is correct, but you'll see I didn't have a currency there. That's a bit of a problem. So maybe I should show, because here you can see I'm showing the currency. So this currency is product.currency, product.price. All right. So the total, maybe I want to show the currency as well over there. All right. So this is going to be products. Actually, you can't access it like that. Can you do that? Products at 0.currency. I don't think you can. So what I'll need to do is that I'll need to get the currency in the front end in here, and then send it to the back end. But I won't do that in this video. You can do that, and then, or you can just hard code it. But I'd rather code it from the products, and I'll just pick a sample one product. So you can say that the currency, the invoice currency. You can do something like that. You can start as an empty string, right? And then for products and products, you can just say invoice currency. Invoice, so it says currency like that. So this invoice currency, you can say that invoice currency is equals to X. Let's see, X dot, not like that, X dot, and let's look at the product models, X dot currency. Yeah, you can do it like that. So you can say X dot currency is the invoice currency. So this will be set all the iterations. So it won't matter which is the last iteration. This will then be set. And then you can then copy that and put it, context dot invoice currency is going to be equals to invoice currency. And then you can then access this number inside of your HTML. So you can then do that. So the total will include the invoice currency. Right? So we'll do it like that, and then that's basically it for this invoice. So you're ready to go. This note is that note that you would have added into the invoice over here when you're adding the invoice note. All right, if you want, this is what you would make. So please make payment to the following bank accounts. All right, so you can say a bank name is, what bank do we have in South Africa? ABSA, right? Bank account number is 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9. Okay, branch code 1 2 3 4 5 6. Okay, account type check account. Okay, invoice reference, payment reference, invoice number. Actually, you can just say payment reference in this specific case. You know what your invoice number is, right? You can just give it to them, and you can do this for all the invoices that you create. You will always have the invoice number so that they know how to reference the invoice. So we're going to edit that quickly, and that's changed. And if we go back to view the invoice, you'll see that information is included in your invoice every time. And you can fix that so it doesn't look so weird. All right, so the R is not shown because I haven't pushed these changes that I've made over here, but I'll push them later on, and you can do it in your own time as well. So this is that first button. This button here is gonna view this invoice in a PDF. So now this is the interesting part, how to create a PDF document inside of Django. Okay, this is like a tutorial in itself, and I'm gonna go through it very quickly in this session, and I'm going to show you how to create a PDF document. All right, so remember yesterday we had this page, Skolo Online. This is our Skolo website. All right, so go over to our Skolo website, and inside of our website, don't worry, I'm not going to take you to a paid course. All right, I'm taking you to our documentation because I've added a page over here that does documentation. So if you go to the website and you put documents at the end with a slash at the beginning, make sure you put an ending slash as well at the end. You will come to this page, which is a documentation page. Now on this documentation page, go to Django, because I've written a lot of code snippets that's going to help you with Django. If you go to the bottom there is a PDF generation section that shows you all the steps to go through to set up your virtual server. So this is assuming you're working with Linux and you're working with an Ubuntu machine. All right, and I've shown you how to get and set up a Linux Ubuntu machine. A lot of the coding that we're doing is not going to be practical for you to do this coding on your personal computer. And people always ask me, but you're not giving us versions for doing this on Windows or versions for doing this on Mac. You know, it's not possible for me to show you everything in all the different versions of machines that you could be working on. So I'm going to do this always once, assuming you're working on a Linux machine, because it's easy to get a Linux machine for $5 from someone like DigitalOcean Domains or whatever. And I've shown you how to do that. I've got lots of tutorials where I show you how to get a virtual server. I'm not going to do that now. But a lot of these tutorials is assuming you've got a virtual server and you're working off a virtual server. If you're going to be a serious coder, get yourself a virtual server. All right, because you're not going to be able to do all of these on your personal computer. How are you going to host this website on your personal computer? You're going to host it on a server. So you might as well build it on a server so that it's ready to host. Now, once you do that, over here, there's a couple of things to follow. I think you don't need this XVB. So if you go through this tutorial, I'm going to take you through this tutorial step by step. You don't need this XVB. I think XVB, you need it if you're going to use IMG-Kit. So IMG-Kit is the sister to pdfkit, and we're going to use pdfkit to generate our PDF. So IMG-Kit is a sister to pdfkit, and you need this for IMG-Kit. So I would install it once, and then you got your thing set up anyway. All right. So if you're inside of your machine, okay, I'm gonna stop running this server here. It has frozen, which it does a lot. Just give it time. But once you've done that, what you need to do is to update your packages, and then just copy this line and run it and install it. That's it. That's all you gotta do. And then the next thing is that you need to install this WKHTML to PDF. All right. This is something which pdfkit uses in the background. You need to have it. If you don't have it, whatever code I give you and you copy it, it's not gonna work. It's just gonna give you an error. All right. So you have to follow these steps exactly. Let's see if our thing is back. It's not back. Okay, it'll come back after a while. So basically, use this line of code, all right? And assuming you're working on Ubuntu 20.04. So if you're working on a different Ubuntu, this line will be different, because here you're just, wget is like downloading, all right? And so you are downloading this from GitHub, this WKH to PDF to HTML directly. There is other tutorials that will show you to just use apt-get, right? To use sudo apt-get, WHTML to PDF. It's problematic if you do that, and you're going to have an error later on, because it's going to get you the wrong version of HTML to PDF. So this HTML to PDF, WK-HTML to PDF has got different versions depending on the machine that you're working on. This one is specifically for Ubuntu 20.04. All right. So if you're working on a different Ubuntu, like 16 or 18 or a different version, you would download a different WK-HTML to PDF. All right. So this is going to get you the correct one. And I'm assuming that you are recent, you just bought your Ubuntu machine recently and it's sitting on Ubuntu 20.04. If it's not, all right, you can just Google. I'm just going to copy this. All right. You can just Google in how to install this, and then Google your machine. So if you were on 16 or whatever, Google that machine and then see what the lines of code you've got. And I've got this nice, maybe I'll link this below, because this really helped me out a lot when I installed it the first time, because I used to use, when I was installing this, I used to use apt-get, and it would install the wrong version and then it wouldn't work. So come over to this tutorial, I'll link it, and then check which Ubuntu version you're on. If you're on 18 or you're on 16, you have to install a different one. And if you're on like a Debian, you have to install a different one. All right. So this has got all the different versions of, depending on which machine you're working from, you have to install the correct one. So I'm assuming you're on Ubuntu 20.04 because you bought this recently and it will have installed the latest Ubuntu version. Okay, if you're watching this recently, if you're watching this in the future, again, just check which version you're on. And I think I've got all the different ones here. If you're on 18, if you're on 16, right? Then once you've done that, what this will do is that it will download this. Let me just make sure that this is back. All right, clear. All right. So you want to do this in the root of your machine. All right. So you want to like CD out of the folder that you're in, so that you're like sitting where there's nothing there. And if you list here, you only have two different folders in here. All right. So I'm going to just do it for you and show you what you need to do here. All right. So just copy all of this. All right. Copy that and paste it in there. Right. And then you'll see it found a file and it installed it. Okay. So wget just installs it. And if you list again, you will see you have a file in here. All right. This file in here is the one you're going to unpack and install into your machine. Right? And then you're going to do it with the next line of code. All right. So you're going to do sudo apt install, right? Sudo apt install, right? And then you're going to do that. And then you can just copy whatever it is that you downloaded and paste it like that and then run it. All right. So I'm not going to run this now because I've already installed this. All right. But technically that is what you would do. All right. So these two lines of code, that's what they mean. Once you've done that, you want to remove. All right. So you can just do rm. All right. You want to do rm and remove this installer because you don't need it anymore and you don't want to sit there hanging. Okay. So I can remove mine quickly. All right. And you won't see anything. But if you clear and you ls, you'll see it has removed. It's no longer there anymore. So that's what you're doing here. So once you've done all of that, you're good to go. All right, then you can go back into your virtual environment and you can do pip install pdfkit, because the pdfkit is the Python library that's going to work with PDF, that's going to do the PDF conversion, but you got to do these things in the background before this would work. All right, so you're going to do pip install pdfkit. Make sure you're inside of your environment. It doesn't really matter which folder you're in when you do this installation, provided you are in the environment. So you just do pip install pdfkit. All right. I've already run it, so I'm not going to run it again. But you would want to run it the first time and you want to do it inside of your virtual environment. Okay. So once you've done that, then you need to do which HTML to PDF. All right. This is important because you want to know where the HTML to PDF is saved, all right? Because you're gonna need it inside of your Python code, because inside of your Python code, you actually have to manually direct the PDF kit to the correct location. And if you don't know where it installed it, you're not gonna get the location right. And sometimes it install it differently. Like I've seen this, which to PP, it is returning different locations based on the machine that I'm on. So run it every time. So you're gonna do which wkhtml to PDF, and then it's going to tell you where this is installed. Right? So copy this and we're going to use it instead of our Python code. Then if you continue with that, you will see I've got a nice example for you, example sample code in here that shows you how you can do this quickly. All right, I'll take you through this code quickly. The first thing you need to do is to give your PDF a name, and you can give it any name, right? And then you need a template. This template is that template over there. Is the same template that we had, the PDF template. All right. But this is actually a bit different. I used a different template because that old template didn't work very well for a PDF document. What you need for a PDF template is the most simplest, most plain template you can have without a lot of HTML. You only need HTML for a table when it comes to invoicing, so that you can organize things like in a in a structured format, like put things to the left, to the right. Okay, so what I did, actually went through the Bootstrap table HTML, and I just copied the section of the HTML that deals with tables, because I'm only really going to be using that HTML for my whatever. So table responsive, D table, and I copied just that and then put it inside of a style inside of your HTML. So we created a blank new HTML. You'll see at the top here, there's no reference to a CSS because it's not going to work when you're doing pdfkit. So if you look at a typical base.html for Django, you'll see at the top you've got all of these viewports, and then you've got like where you're linking your HTML and your CSS at the top. You would be linking them inside of your static folder, right? When you're working with pdfkit, this doesn't work. It's not going to find the HTML like that, because PDF works in a different way. So it's when you're working with HTML to PDF, the best practice, and I've done this a lot of times, is to include inline the CSS inside of the template. And this is like similar to if you were doing an HTML template, you would want to you include the HTML and the CSS inside of the template. So for the PDF, for our template over here, and because obviously like a Bootstrap CSS file would be huge, right? Think about, you don't need all of the CSS classes. You don't need everything. You just need classes that will help you organize the document in a structured manner. So you actually need only the table class. So I went through my Bootstrap CSS and I just copied that table class and pasted it in here. That's all I need. I don't need everything else. So, and you'll see then it's just like, it's that CSS from there over there. And then you put it inside of a style block. So, and inside of the head of the HTML. So when you create a new document, so let me just show you how we did this. I'm going to start with a new HTML and just call this to delete.html. All right. So you're going to start with a blank HTML template, right? And inside that blank HTML template, you're going to do this to, oh yeah, this is not an HTML. Let me rename this. Rename.html, all right, like that. And then if it's HTML, then if you say doc type and you say HTML like that, all right, it creates like a blank HTML structure. What you have is your body over there, you have your head over there, right? And inside here you just put in your title of your website, of your HTML, and inside of the head in here you're gonna put your style. All right, you're gonna put your style, and you're gonna paste in here your table styling. If you know how to write HTML, CSS, you can write this styling yourself. But I don't know how to write CSS, so I copied the Bootstrap one, and then you can use the table styling over here. All right. So I'm gonna put Bootstrap HTML styling, or whatever HTML styling you wanna work with. You put that in there. Then inside of your body, you're gonna then write your PDF template. All right. So that's what you need to do. I'm gonna close that. Don't save, and I'm gonna just delete that because I don't need that, because I've already done the template over here. All right. And then you're going to organize your template properly. All right. Your invoice template, you're going to organize it properly. No, this is not the one. The PDF template is the one. All right. So this is the one that I used, the table styling from Bootstrap. So I worked on a different template. You're going to organize it nicely. This is very similar to what's over here. The only difference is I've just moved things around a little bit, and you can, play this as you go along and make sure that your template looks right. Okay. So at the top there, again, I've got the invoice number, and I've got my logo inside of a table. All right. Then I've got another table where I've got the addresses inside of the table. So you can see there's a T body, a T row. All right. Then I've got the address on the left, the address on the other side. And then I've got the invoice terms. Then I've got another table over there with a title, item, quantity, amount. and then I do the same thing for product and products, item, quantity, amount, and then I do the total, the invoice total, and then I put the invoice notes. Okay, so this is just simple organizing the HTML the way that you want it, very similar to this one. All right, but it's just using different CSS. Then once you've done that, this is your template. Okay, so at the top there are some new imports that you need to include. All right, so copy all of these imports like that and paste them inside of your views file, views.py, at the top. All right, so paste those templates, the HTTP response, the get template, pdfkit, OS, and everything. Okay, so paste all of those at the top. I've already done it in my file. And then you're going to create this function. All right, and then in this function, you start with a file name. You start with a get template. All right, and then this HTML is the HTML I just showed you now. Build this HTML and then make sure that you can refer to the correct location. So in my specific case, it's going to be inside of the invoice, and then you're going to put the template name, PDF template. All right, so then put that in there. Once you've done that, you're going to create your context. But with us, our context is going to be very similar to the previous path that we did. So inside of our URLs, when we did this view PDF, we're going to use the same context pretty much. So if you look at that, the view document invoice, we already started building this. All right, if you go back into the views file and you search for that, all right, the context is going to be exactly the same. So I actually just copied the context from the top version. This whole thing, I just copied and pasted it here so that I don't have to retype it because it's going to be exactly the same. All right, so this whole section looks the same as what we had in the previous path. Then we start with the name of the file. The file name I gave it, I'm going to use the invoice unique ID as a file name. Then I'm going to use get template. And then remember, this is where I have my template. It's inside of invoice PDF template HTML, which is this one. All right. And then let's continue with the code. Then we're going to use template render. All right. So template render, we're going to use that template and we're going to render the context inside of the template. And then we're going to define our options. This is probably the most important part of this. When I used to do this as a rookie the first time, this is where I used to get tripped up with the options. Because you can do everything right and then you run your PDF, it just gives like this cryptic error, then you have no idea what's wrong. You've got to get the options right, okay? The encoding, you've got to get it right. In some cases, you need JavaScript delay, but you don't need this actually for this specific use because we have no JavaScript. And actually, you don't want to have any JavaScript because it doesn't load inside of pdfkit, to be honest. Right? I only have this to show you if you wanted to do JavaScript delay where you would put it. But in our case, we don't actually need it. Enable local file access. Say none. All right. Even though we don't have a local file access in this case, just put none. This is if inside of your HTML, for example, if inside of your PDF HTML, like at the top, maybe you had some references to an image or CSS, people still try and put CSS in here, then you want to say this is none. Otherwise, it will just give you an error that I cannot access local content or whatever. Then after that, the page size is going to be A4, and then just put a custom header encoding gzip. Okay, so this just copy and paste it as it is. Don't change anything here. This is a tried and tested option, configuration. Just use it like that. And then after that, you're going to create a config object where you're going to say PDF configuration, and then you have to specify the WHTML to PDF, right? This is where you're going to paste that which PDF. I know when you look at my code, you're going to see that. Don't copy and paste my code as is. It might not work for you. So when you did that which HTML to PDF and you got that user bin, you'll see this is actually different. So you need to copy that and paste what you find in here. Because here you'll see it was user local bin. When I was writing this code, the machine I was on, that is where the HTML to PDF was. So in your space, you're going to paste your specific HTML to PDF from running which HTML to PDF there. And then you're going to specify your CSSs. I know I'm just writing this here, but for me, it's never worked to specify it there and then edit inside of the options. All right. So once you've done that, you're going to specify where your CSS files are. You can have multiple ones and you can add them as an array. And then once you've done that, you can then create the file content. and then create a response, HTTP response, and then return that response. Okay, now if we go back to our code, we're doing the exact thing. We're doing that. That's the options. But you'll see this CSS, CSS1, CSS2, when you create your file content, you would add a CSS block in there. And you can put an array and say CSS1 and CSS2. If you have another CSS, all the CSS files you've got, this is how you inject the CSS inside of your template. But like I'm telling you, this never works well for me. So I'm showing you how to do it, right? But I'm going to remove it because for me, I find it's just better to put the CSS inside of the HTML and just put the minimum styling needs for that specific PDF. Because every time you create a PDF, it's not like you need a lot of CSS. You don't need a lot of CSS. You just need maybe, a table arrangement, a grid arrangement, paragraph arrangement. That's it. All right. So it's easier to just write that the way you do emails, the way you style emails, when you do HTML emails, where you just put the CSS that you need in there. That's the best approach. That's the tried and tested method of doing it. But this is an alternative. And then you're going to do file content, pdfkit from string. All right. Put your options in there. Create an HTTP response and then return the response. All right. And then this is inside of the view function. And then this view function, you refer to it inside of your URLs over there. And then you get that URL name. All right. And then you go back to your old template where is the create invoice at the bottom here. You then put that URL in there. All right. And you give it the slug because the URL needs the slug. All right. And then you put that in the button as a href of the button. Then when you click that button, it should take you to an HTML, a PDF page, right? So let's have a look at it. I've already run it. I know it works. I've tested it because I don't want to troubleshoot in front of the camera. Let's see, where's our file? Goodness. CD development. All right, CD, this is where we are. All right, then we're gonna CD in the again in there. All right, so this is our invoicing app. We're gonna do Python manage.py run server. All right, let's run it on port 5555. I must remember to close this port when I'm done with this tutorial. People are starting to mess with my port. So let's refresh this, make sure this is running just fine. So that's the second button. Let's press it. And it's taking a bit of time because of that JavaScript delay, and I need to remove it. So inside of the views over here, this JavaScript delay, I don't need this. Okay. I can just put 10 seconds because it takes time to open the page because of that. But anyway, you'll see this is the arrangement of how the PDF is going to look like. It's similar to that previous template we just looked at now, but you can see it's different, right? This is like we've designed it for like a PDF document. And just like this, we've created a PDF. If you want, right here and now, you can download this PDF file, right? You can download it and save it somewhere. In your desktop. Let's save it in our desktop. It's a PDF document. You can download it. You can then email it manually yourself if you want it. So you've already created a PDF invoice. There it is. So if you go to our desktop, let's look at it. Let's open it up. There it is. So this is a PDF file document. It's done. You can do anything you would do with a normal PDF. Record, email it, print it, you can do whatever you want to do with it. But what I want to do is I want to email it to the client directly off the system. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to now include an emailing functionality to email that. So that's the last part of the tutorial. So I'm going to go back on this one, and then we're going to wire this button to allow us to send an email. That's the last bit. All right. Now for that, go back to our URLs. It's going to be this last URL, email invoice. Okay, we're going to find that. Go back to the view function and find that. And everything is exactly the same. Actually, this same code, you can It's exactly the same thing. The only thing you need to do at the end of this code is that this content, you need to save this file. All right. So you're going to create a new line of code. So if you go back to my documentation, under here, I've got send email with an attachment. All right. But this one is using multi-alternative functionality. And multi-alternatives is the one you would use when you're sending an email with an HTML. All right, because you might want to do that. So actually the code I'm going to show you is not the same as this, because this is the multi-alternatives, but it works exactly the same way. All right. So the only thing you would do is you would use this emailing function, right, and just paste it in there. So you would copy this email function and paste it somewhere instead of returning a response. So once you've created the file content here, but you would create it differently. You would, because you don't need it to display it there. You just create it and you save it. So you can add, this takes an additional argument of a save path. So now I'm saying false here because I'm not saving it. So let me show you. The next functionality where I've said false, you would put in here an actual, absolute path to where you want to save this document. So over here, instead of false, I would put in a save path. And this save path, I just created it. I want to save it inside of my media root, and I'm going to create a new folder in there called client invoices. Okay, and then I'm going to use the os make dirs to make this directory if it doesn't exist. So if it exists, it's fine. If it doesn't exist, you're going to remake it. All right, and then you're going to put that PDF save path in there. All right, and then it will save that document in there. So once you've saved it, and then you can write your function for creating an email, and in that function you're gonna send the save path, because that path is going to be used as an attachment inside of the email. All right, so if we look at our email, this function, we wrote it somewhere else because we don't want to write that function in here. So we wrote it inside of let's see, we wrote it inside of the functions. All right, so this is that function. It's a quick function. All right, so at the top there, from Django core email, you import email message. From Django config, you import settings. This is where we're going to have the settings for our email, the host user and SMTP, You're going to need all of this to send an email. All right, so inside of my documentation, under Django settings, I also have Django settings. All right, this is where the message tags was. So if you scroll down here at the bottom, I show you what you must include inside of your settings.py file. So this file, invoicing, this settings.py file, this file, at the bottom of this file, I'm not going to show you those my settings, but at the bottom of this file, just include these settings. Okay, email backend, leave it exactly the way that it is. The email host, put in your host. So if your email is like, I don't know, mail.yourdomain.co.za, this is the same settings you would use when you're setting up your Outlook. You always put in your host, you put in your port, your TLS true, then you're going to put in your username, your email address. So my email address, for example, is admin@skolo.online. Put that username there, put your password, and then default from, don't forget this one. Sometimes you get an error if you don't include it. So these are tried and tested email configuration for the settings.py file if you want to send an email. All right, so you can go have a look at my documentation and just copy this section. All right, and put it at the bottom of your settings.py file with your correct email configuration. All right, so once you've done that, when you go over there inside of your settings.py file, where is it now? Inside of your functions. All right, this code is gonna work just fine. You're gonna say from email, remember email host user, this email host user is that email host user. All right, so that when it sends the email, it knows it's sending this email from that person. And then all these other ones, you don't have to specify them in here. By default, Django will use the information you've put in your settings.py file to send that email. All right, you might want to have a subject, invoice notification. Good day, please find attached invoice from. Okay, and then I'm going to put in the client name so that they know who the invoice is from for immediate attention. Regards, Then you're going to create an email object. You put the subject, the body, from email. This is not an HTML, so we're not using multi-alternatives. It's just a straight text email. And then you say attach file. Then you attach that file path. This file path is the one that comes from the other side, the absolute path to the location of your PDF document. You say attach file path, message.send. Right? That's it. So you copy this function inside of here. All right? And then you include it in there. Make sure at the top of your document, you import from functions, import that function. Make sure you've imported it to the top, or else you're gonna have an error if you don't import it. And then you go back over there, and to email, you just call that function. That's it. To the email, it's the invoice client email address. From the client, it's a client name, because we're gonna put the client name inside of that HTML template. Inside of that email template. And then what we're going to do is that we're going to change the invoice status. This is something I changed in the background. I didn't show you this because I think it's important to tell the client once the invoice is sent, so that they know which invoices have been emailed already, which ones have not been emailed. So what I did is that I just added a new status called email sent. So inside of your models.py file, if you look at your invoices, it had a status of current, overdue, and paid. I added a new status called email sent, so that when I send an email, I can just update that status. All right. So if you go back to the views, as soon as I send the email, I'll just say invoice status is email sent and save. That's it. That's all you do. So I'm changing the status, and then I'll say the email was sent successfully, redirect back, boom. That's it. That's how you send an email. So now we're going to test this. I know I've already tested it. It works. Let me just make sure my server is running. Good. I'm going to go over there. I'm going to refresh this page. I'm not getting an error, so it's running. So we're going to test this email. Remember, let's just double check which client we're sending this to. We're sending this to the Great Tomatoes client. All right. So if you go to clients and you look at Great Tomatoes, it's using this email address, admin@skolo.online. So it will get this email address from the when you've entered it inside of your client. All right. So if you change the client, let's say, and you put in a different client, and you inside of your invoice, you change to a different client, it will send that invoice to the next person. So the email is not input manually. The email that the invoice is going to be sent to will be the email of that client when you set up the client email address, because that's how we are getting the email address over here. We're saying invoice.client because we can access the client from the invoice, and then we're using the email address of the client to send. All right, so I'm going to email this, and I should get this email address. I should get this email inside of my Skolo Online mailbox. Good, it feedbacks email was sent successfully to the client. All right, and then I'm going to double check my inbox. Right. I'm gonna double check my invoice, admin Skolo Online. There it is. This I was testing yesterday. Today it's the same. So this was just sent now, like right now. This email just came in now. And good day, please find attached invoice from Skolo Online Learning for your immediate attention. This is the attachment. All right. So if I say open attached file, open with preview, yeah. There it is. The invoice is attached. Okay, I just have to remember to put in the currency over there, but you can do that even in your own time. So you've emailed your invoice to the client. So we are done. Our application is pretty much done. And thank you guys for watching. I'll make this code available. I will sanitize it first. What I've added is I've redone the dashboard quickly. I won't show you how. I'll let you do it yourself to display the number of invoices, paid invoices. And I've gone back and redone the products, the invoice page as well, to have a button that leads you to the invoice. So you can view an invoice, delete an invoice, and you'll see the invoice status has changed. All right. So over here, you can quickly add a new invoice. Let's try it. Add a new invoice. All right. That's a new invoice. We can add a new client over there. Let's say we say Stack Industries. All right. And the invoice title is, monthly stock invoices. Put in a due date over there, and payment terms. Let's give these guys a 30-day. Oh, I forgot to add the payment terms into the invoice. Okay, remember to do that. All right, and then any notes for the client. Let me find some random notes that I can send to the client over here. Copy that. All right. Random notes. Let's edit this invoice. Awesome. And then let's add our first product. Let's call this website design. All right. Let's paste the same stuff in there. All right. The quantity is 4, and I'm going to charge them 4,500 for 4 websites. And let's change the currency this time to US dollars. Save the changes. Now that's a different product. That is 4,500 US dollars. That's the new invoice numbers. You can see if we view this invoice, you can see it in PDF. The items is quantity 45. So this 45 times 4 should give you 18,000. And this is the invoice notes. All right. And the client, I need to specify who the client is. All right. So the client is not specified. Is it not specified? So Stack Industries, let's add that client. All right. So that's added. Let's view the PDF invoice with that client added. There you go. Now you can see Stack Industries with Skolo Online Learning. All right. So that invoice, you can also view it in this format. 2 different ways to view the invoice is exactly the same. This wasn't even necessary. We didn't have to do this. And then you can email this, but the email address of this is a fake email, so it's not going to go anyway. All right. And if you then go back to your invoices, you'll see now you've got 2 invoices. The first one, the email has been sent. This one is current. The email has not been sent yet. If you send the email, this invoice status will change to invoice sent. If you go back to your dashboard, you'll see now you have 2 invoices. You have 3 clients. And if you want to view invoices directly from there, it takes you there. So our website is pretty much done, guys. Yes. So I know this was a long one, but I wanted to finish everything today. I didn't want to leave this for the last moment. Okay. So the best way to go through this code, guys, is just go through it line by line. I get a lot of comments. Oh, this is not working. That's not working. I've shown you in camera doing everything line by line, and I'm going to make the code available. So you, as a developer, you have to solve your problems. Okay. I'm never going to answer somebody and try and figure out what's wrong with their code. It's your responsibility to figure that out. Okay. So see you guys next week with another interesting tutorial. Thank you guys for watching.